Thick fog is rising over the ocean as the sun is slowly sinking towards the horizon. It's hard to see further away than a few dozen feet, but that's enough to notice a hulking, skeletal shape in the distance. As your ship approaches the figure, your heart beats faster, and then you make out the details of another vessel, abandoned by the looks of it. Ghost ships do exist, and their mysteries aren't always solved. Take MV Hoita, for example. It was a wooden vessel built in 1931 as a luxury yacht. It had served well to various people over 20 years before it was bought by a Samoan sailor and became a merchant ship. In 1955, though, Hoita's service came to an abrupt and mysterious end. On October 3rd, it set sail for another trading voyage that should have taken no more than 48 hours. Delays happen in the sea, so when Hoita didn't arrive on October 5th as scheduled, there was little worry yet. But then it failed to come on the following day too. There was no distress signal or any other sign of Hoita's presence anywhere between its departure and arrival points. A search and rescue party was dispatched to find the ship, and for 6 days, they were scouting the area of nearly 100,000 square miles. On October 12th, the mission returned to the base empty-handed. Hoita vanished without a trace. It was only a month later that another merchant ship, Tuvalu, noticed the missing vessel far away from its route, drifting in the open sea and listing heavily. The sailors boarded the ship and found that all of its crew and passengers, 25 people total, were missing, along with all the cargo the vessel had been carrying. The radio was tuned to the International Distress Channel, meaning that the crew had been trying to ask for help, but they couldn't reach anyone because the radio cable had been damaged, limiting the range to 2 miles. The lifeboats were missing as well, indicating that people on board must have left the ship. Unfortunately, they seem to have taken the logbook with them, leaving the rescue team clueless as to what had happened. Even today, the mystery of MV Hoita hasn't been solved yet. No one knows where the crew and passengers had gone and what had caused them to leave. SV Carol A. Deering wasn't a ghost ship in the usual sense of the word. There were no sightings of it in the open sea. Instead, it was found on the shore, but the circumstances of it running aground are a puzzle shrouded in mystery. Carol A. Deering was built in 1919 in Maine, and it was a large vessel made for commercial voyages. Unfortunately, despite its large cost of construction, it had only served for a year before its last trip. July 19th, 1920. The ship was traveling from Puerto Rico to Rio de Janeiro via Newport News to deliver a cargo of coal. It was almost halfway to the final destination when the captain fell seriously ill, and the crew turned back to drop him and his son off and replace the captain. The voyage went without incident, but when it came to Barbados in December to resupply, there were strange moods among the crew. The first mate didn't seem to be happy with the new captain. No one paid much attention to it back then, when they probably should have. The last sighting of Carol A. Deering at sea was on January 28, 1921, when a lightship noticed it off the coast of North Carolina. There was some commotion on the quarterdeck of the ship, where the crew were normally not allowed. Then, another vessel sighted it, but there was already no one on the decks. On January 31st, the merchant ship was found hard aground in the Diamond Shoals, a site notorious for numerous shipwrecks that had been occupying there for centuries. When the search and rescue party boarded the ship, they found it abandoned, the log and personal belongings of the crew gone, along with the 2 lifeboats. There is still no answer to what happened on board of Carol A. Deering that January, although the most popular version was mutiny. Maybe we'll never find out the truth though. SS Beijimo is perhaps one of the most notable ghost ships in history. This large cargo steamer was built in 1914 in Sweden and plodded its way dutifully over 16 years, trading provisions for pelts with native tribes of Alaska and Canada. But then, on October 1st, 1931, Beijimo got caught in pack ice. At first, it seemed the crew would be able to wait it out and continue on their route because the ship broke free in a couple of days. But in less than a week, it became caught again, this time for good. In another week, a rescue party was sent to fetch 22 of the Beichismo's crew, while another 15 remained behind to wait through the winter if necessary and get the ship back. But a month later, after a powerful blizzard struck their camp, the sailors went out of their shelters only to find the ship gone. Luckily, a few days later, a native hunter told the Beichimo hadn't been lost yet. He'd seen it about 45 miles from where they had been stationed. They managed to track it down, but decided the ship wouldn't survive the winter, so they took the most valuable cargo from its hold and abandoned it. They were wrong though. SS Beichimo did survive that winter, and many more that followed. When the ice broke, it sailed away on its own, drifting listlessly along the shores of Canada and Alaska. There were numerous sightings of the ghost ship, sometimes adrift in the open sea, and at other times stuck in the pack ice again. People attempted to board and salvage it, but weather conditions or lack of equipment always prevented them. SS Beichimo was last sighted by native Alaskans in 1969, 38 years after its abandonment. What became of it later remains unknown. The story of SS Orang Medan is one of the most puzzling and harrowing ghost ship stories of the 20th century. No one even knows for sure if the ship even existed in the first place. It wasn't recorded in Lloyd's Shipping, the International Register of Ships, which makes it either a tall tale or a vessel that avoided being officially recognized for some shady reasons. In any case, the accounts as to what happened to the Medan vary. According to most reports, it was carrying some unknown cargo in the Indonesian waters when a distress call was received by another ship in the vicinity. The officer on duty heard an SOS message, but its contents are different depending on the accounts. The message did not repeat, and the crew of Medan didn't answer to any attempts to contact it back. The ship that received the distress call hurried to the rescue, but they only reached the vessel the following day, when it was already drifting and slightly listing. When the rescuers boarded the ship, they found that none of the crew had survived. However, one lifeboat was missing, which implied that there was at least one crew member who managed to escape. What happened to the rest of the people on board remains a mystery to this day. Still, there are no hard facts about this story, so we might never find out whether SS Orang Medan was actually a ship and not a thing of fiction. SV Zabrina was a 3-mast sailing barge built in 1873 for river trade ships in South America. She served for well over 4 decades, proving to be a sturdy and reliable ship. It was later transferred to Europe, where it continued serving its purpose well. But then, in October 1917, Zabrina set sail on a regular voyage only to be found ashore several days later. Mysteriously, although the ship was perfectly intact, the entire crew of 5 and the captain were gone. There is no direct evidence or hard facts as to what really happened that day. The most convincing theory is that the crew were washed away from the deck because of an underwater explosion. And then the ship sailed ahead without them. But the truth, as always, remains unknown. Look, the sea is glowing from within. It's stunning, yet eerie at the same time. White glow covering a huge area of the sea surface is not what you expect to see on a dark night. You look at one of the scariest and mysterious phenomena in the ocean. Let's study it. On January 30th, 1864, the Confederate ship CSS Alabama was sailing southwest along the Horn of Africa when the crew members noticed a mysterious white glowing sea. Captain Raphael Semmes described it as a sickly and unearthly glare of a phantom sea. Although Semmes was a stern and fearless sailor, he was scared by this bright water in the middle of the dark sea. At first, the crew thought they had been sailing over some kind of flooded ridge. They threw a weighted line, which immediately sank to the seabed several hundred feet down. Obviously, the mysterious glow was not a ridge. For several hours, the ship sailed through this eerie glowing sea, and then, suddenly, this bright region ended. The Alabama entered the usual dark waters. Captain Raphael Semmes' description was one of the very first documented accounts of a mysterious and elusive phenomenon called the Milky Sea.
In 1851, in the famous book Moby Dick, this phenomenon was described as a sailor's quiet, superstitious fear at the entrance to the midnight sea of milky whiteness. Jules Verne, in his novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, described this phenomenon more scientifically. One of the characters of his book said that the whiteness was caused by the presence of myriads of infusoria, a sort of luminous little worm, gelatinous and colorless. For centuries, people have reported mysterious glowing water at night, and only recently have scientists got closer to solving this mystery. But first, let's be clear. What Captain Raphael Semmes saw was slightly different from that violet-blue glow called bioluminescence. Aristotle wrote about luminous algae and phytoplankton in the 3rd century BCE. He noticed that sometimes the water produced bright blue flashes when he hit the surface of the sea with a baton. In 1492, Christopher Columbus observed unusual flickering of light in the ocean caused by bioluminescent marine worms. As it turned out later, those worms rose to the surface to perform a circular mating dance. In the late 1800s, scientists discovered that bioluminescence is the result of an oxidative reaction inside certain animal and plant cells. You might have seen it at night while walking along the shore. If not, you can watch a video with bioluminescent water on the internet. But milky seas are a slightly different phenomenon. The sea glows white as if it's illuminated by a bright spotlight, and the area of white water can extend for miles. Unlike bioluminescence, milky seas are a rarer and quite elusive phenomenon, which is why it was so difficult for scientists to determine its nature. People didn't come across such glowing waters very often, so many regarded it as legends about mermaids or sea monsters. But in 1985, science got a chance to study this thing in more detail. That year, a U.S. Navy research vessel got into the Milky Sea while sailing near the Arabian Peninsula. There were scientists on board who collected some samples of milky water and conducted a laboratory analysis. And that's what they found out. The water contained bioluminescent bacteria, but what caused them to glow? Scientists suggested that algae colonies first rose to the water's surface. They began to bloom and gradually decompose. Those cells of rotten algae burst and release special substances, lipids. A huge number of bacteria began to feed on lipids and multiply rapidly. The number of bacteria grew in such large numbers that they began to produce a continuous white glow. But where exactly and under what conditions could these milky seas appear? It was necessary to know not only for scientists, but also for authorities. Such a bright spot in the water could reveal the outlines of a submarine and turn it into an easy target for enemies. So scientists continued their research. One of them was atmospheric scientist Stephen Miller. He started studying milky seas in the early 2000s and made a breakthrough in his research. To begin with, he decided to find out if the sensors on space satellites were capable of seeing bioluminescence. Miller started looking for any mention of extensive milky spots on the internet. He came across the Frontier Science portal, where people wrote about strange and unexplained phenomenon around the world. There, he found a report from the British merchant ship SS Lima, which hit the Milky Sea in January 1995 while sailing along the Horn of Africa. This is how the log entry described the event. The bioluminescence appeared to cover the entire sea area from horizon to horizon, and it appeared as though the ship was sailing over a field of snow or gliding over the clouds. After that, Miller collected the images taken by certain satellites over the place where the SS Lima sailed at that time. At first, he didn't notice anything strange, but later he realized that he was looking directly at the Milky Sea. The area of the glowing spot was so large that he had to scale the image down. That's when he saw a spot that looked like a comma. The edges of this spot coincided with the place where the crew of the SS Lima saw the white glow. Miller studied the images of this area taken before, during, and after the encounter, and found out that the Milky Sea rotated counterclockwise to the local ocean currents. But most importantly, Miller now knew that the White Sea could be seen from satellites. In 2011, 2 satellites with more sensitive sensors, capable of seeing in poor light, entered Earth's orbit. They helped Miller and other scientists to find out that Milky Seas appeared most often in the winter and summer in the northwestern Indian Ocean and around Indonesia. Great! Now Miller had the place and time to work with. He analyzed satellite data for the period from 2012 to 2021 and found out that one of the largest Milky Sea incidents occurred in 2019. For 45 nights, a white glow covered 40,000 square meters, which is the approximate area of Kentucky. But even after all these studies, scientists haven't managed to find the exact cause of the white glow. In addition to the idea about the disintegration of algae, researchers have put forward a theory that the glow may be caused by quorum sensing. This is the ability of bacteria to communicate using chemical signals that produce light. Okay, let's say there's some truth to this, but why are they doing this? To find out, let's look at classical blue bioluminescence in other organisms. Some biologists suggest that with the help of the glow, bacteria attract partners for reproduction. Another theory claims that the bright light works as an alarm when dangerous enemies appear in the sea. For example, a colony of phytoplankton meets hungry fish. The organisms turn their glow on to attract larger fish. It's like using evil to fight another evil. There are many theories, but what's the problem with figuring out the exact reason? Even with all the satellite help and studies of Milky Seas, it's quite difficult to get to the right place at the right time. Let's say a white glow the size of a football field appears in the sea. The satellites notice this and send a signal to the research center. Next, a team of scientists boards a vessel and goes directly to the place. The distance to the Milky Sea can be quite big. And by the time they arrive, the glow has already disappeared. In an ideal situation, scientists need to be around the area before, during, and after the glow to get the full picture. Unfortunately, this is not possible at the moment.
It's 2018. You get up early in the morning to go ashore and catch some fish. You come to the spot you were yesterday, throw the hook into the sea, and wait. The float is twitching. You've caught some fish, but hey, hello? Why aren't you doing anything? Right now, you don't care about the fish. You're looking at something in the distance. You open your mouth in surprise since you see a huge ship stuck on a shoal. It wasn't here yesterday, so it got here at night. Okay, it'll probably sail away sooner or later. You fish for a few more hours. During this time, you observe the ship and notice no movement there. Is it empty? Boats and the Coastal Service are sailing from the shore to the vessel. You decide to check it out too. You get in your old boat and go there. The mist descends to the water, making the ship look creepy. The colossal vessel is rusty and empty. But where is the whole crew? And how did it get there? The Coast Guard comes on board. They search the hold, the cabins, and the upper deck. There's someone's stuff, some remnants of food supplies, notebooks, and clothes. Everything suggests the crew has disappeared for some reason. Fishers who noticed the vessel first didn't see anyone coming down from the board. No radio signals were sent to the port, and no one reported about the ship. It appeared here from nowhere. The only chance to get any information is to look at the number and name of the vessel. This is Sam Ratulangi, PB 1600. The Coast Guard checks the information, studies the data of all the country ships, and no way. One company built the boat in 2001 in Indonesia. People used it to transport heavy loads across the seas around Asia. The ship had been properly operating for 8 years. People were delivering industrial goods to different points in the region, but something went wrong. In 2009, Sam Ratulangi was sailing near the coast of Taiwan, and that's it. There were no further records about it. there were no reports in any port. Everyone thought it must have drowned, so no one had been looking for it for years. And then, 9 years later, it appears here, big and rusty, off the coast of Myanmar, without sailors, without fuel. An investigation starts. City services are trying to find out the names of all the sailors working on the ship and find clues that would lead to solving this mystery. They also hope the ship owner will appear soon. They find 2 tow ropes on board. This means that some other ship towed Samratulangi to this place. Then they identify and find 13 crew members. These people say they wanted to reach the factory in Bangladesh to repair Samratulangi. Another vessel helped tow the ship, but then 2 cables tore off, and a storm began. No one wanted to stay on board during such weather, so the crew members left it. No one knows what the ship has been doing for the last 9 years, and how it was possible without people on board. And here's another, much more mysterious ship story. On February 16, 2020, locals found a large cargo ship stuck on a rocky shore off the coast of an Irish village. The boat looked rusty, with holes in the hull and rotten parts. People hadn't seen this vessel the day before, so it appeared there at night. The last time people saw the Alta cargo ship was a few months earlier, thousands of miles off the coast of Ireland. That day, the Alta was sailing in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Another ship, the MS Protector, noticed it. MS Protector crew members tried to contact the ship, but received no response. The people on board realized that they were facing an empty vessel. And then, 5 months later, it appeared near the coast of Ireland. There are more questions than answers in this story, but we managed to find something out. In 2015, the Alta appeared and disappeared from the radar several times. Any ship has an internal tracking system, so people can track its route using satellites. But Alta crew members often disabled this system. Perhaps they were engaged in some illegal activity. Anyway, in 2017, the ship often sailed between the ports of Greek islands. Then, the tracking signal disappeared and appeared only 10 months later, off the coast of North Africa. During this time, the ship changed several flags. In September 2018, the Alta was southeast of Bermuda and headed for Haiti. Then, the crew started facing problems. First, the main engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship began to drift. Several days passed, but the crew members weren't able to repair it. They began to run out of food and water supplies. The situation got even worse when they found out that a hurricane was approaching the place. Fortunately, they managed to contact the U.S. Coast Guard. A helicopter flew to the Alta on October 2nd to bring them some supplies. There was enough food for several days. Then, a rescue boat sailed to the ship. It evacuated all the sailors and delivered them to Puerto Rico before the hurricane. The Alta had to drift alone in the ocean. After a while, another ship approached the Alta to tow it to the shores of Guyana. But at this moment, everything went wrong. Someone stole the boat, disabled the tracking system, and sailed away in an unknown direction. After almost a year, the MS Protector found the empty Alta in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, 9 months later, the ship without a crew sailed to the shores of Ireland. How did it manage to travel across the Atlantic and get to the coast of Ireland? It's still a mystery. Maybe it was just luck. No one else saw the ship all this time. It was just covering huge distances, surviving storms. Who's the captain? What happened to the thieves? Who owns the ship now? One day, someone called the village administration and introduced themselves as the vessel owner. But that unknown person didn't provide any evidence. They found several barrels of oil on the ship, which they took away by helicopter. The Alta was rusting. Corrosion of metal could damage the environment. The vessel had no commercial value, yet it would have taken millions to get rid of it. There were 3 options for what to do: leave the ship where it was, tow it into the sea and let it sink, or disassemble it for scrap. But nature had its own plans. Storms and strong waves split the hull into 2 parts. The Alta was drifting without a crew in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean for about 2 years. But this is nothing compared to a ship that was traveling for 38 years. The record belongs to the SS Beichimo. It was a merchant vessel owned by some trading company. In 1931, the ship found itself on the ice off the coast of Alaska. Its movement slowed down. A thick layer of ice blocked the ship, and a strong storm only made the situation worse. The blizzard was so intense that the crew members couldn't see anything but a white veil in front of their eyes. Sailing any further was impossible. The team had to wait for the storm to end. They waited for a day, 2, 3 days. A week had passed, but the snowstorm was only getting stronger. Then, one day, it grew weaker. The crew members split into 2 teams. The first team went to the nearest city. The second group, along with the captain, stayed on board. They set up camp next to the ship and waited for the blizzard, which had started again, to end. There was 0 visibility. And finally, one day, the storm was over. Great! And now, wait a minute. But where is the ship? The SS Beichimo just disappeared during the blizzard. The captain was sure that the ship had sunk, so he left along with the crew. Then, a week later, they saw the vessel drifting near the area where they had lost it. The hull was damaged so severely that it was unsafe to sail on it. Repairing the ship would be pointless and expensive, so the captain decided to abandon it. He was sure that it would go underwater sooner or later, but it stayed afloat for the next few days, the next few months, and a few years. People had reported seeing it at various points along the coast of Alaska for 38 years. The last record of the SS Beichimo is dated 1969. Those who saw it claimed the ship was completely frozen, almost merged with the ice. Some people planned to start an expedition to find the ship, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The vessel is probably lying somewhere on the deep sea floor.
You'll never believe this. Wait, maybe you will. Scientists have discovered stolen treasures worth $138 million on the ocean floor near Madagascar. Well, whatever. Let's be honest. It gives you little pleasure to hear about treasures that you'll never get. However, the story surrounding this find is just like an action movie. So here's the scoop about it. So let's see. Well, count them. 400 precious stones, including 110 diamonds and 250 emeralds, gold and silver bars, expensive silk, coins, relics, and many other valuable items. Even now, it seems like a jackpot. But for the 18th century, it was a real fortune, about $138 million by today's standards. In early 1721, sailors loaded all this stuff into a Portuguese treasury ship called the Nossa Senhora do Cabo. That's a mouthful. The Viceroy of Goa and the Archbishop of Goa also stepped on board. After that, the vessel sailed from Goa to Lisbon. The ship had not only economic but also diplomatic value. You probably already feel that something bad is going to happen to the boat. Well, good guess. Now, go buy a lottery ticket. During the voyage, the ship faced a severe storm. The waves rocked the ship and flooded it with water. The wind shook the masts. To increase their chances of surviving, the ship's crew needed to reduce the weight. Therefore, they began to dump their cargo into the sea. There were artillery shells among this cargo, and they were necessary for protection in case of enemies. It seems the crew didn't realize what a critical mistake they had made, but at that moment, they needed to stay alive. The ground appeared ahead. It was the island of Réunion. There, the ship waited out the storm and was ready to move on. But then another, more serious problem appeared. On April 8th, the ship, I'll call it the NASA from here on, met pirates. Of course, the boat with such valuable cargo should have been equipped with powerful means of protection. But almost all of those were thrown overboard by the sailors during the storm. They had little chance of getting out of that mess alive. The pirates they faced were among the most dangerous pirates in history. And you know why? Because their leader was Olivier the Buzzard Levasseur. Now, let's take a small sidebar because it wouldn't be enough to say only a few words about Levasseur. The Buzzard was one of the most mysterious and terrible pirates in history, worse even than the dread pirate Roberts. People are still trying to solve the mystery he left behind, but more on that later. Now, what do you think is the normal life story of any pirate? Let's see, they were probably born in poor neighborhoods and grew up in poverty and brutality. They were used to getting what they wanted by threatening people, so they started plundering ships on the seas and oceans. Well, Olivier Levasseur wasn't like that. According to some stories, he was born in the north of France sometime between 1687 and 1690 into a rich bourgeois family. He had everything people of that time could ever dream of: well-off parents, a home, food, and a good education. He dreamed of becoming an architect, a priest, or a naval officer. In the end, he chose something close to the third. From 1701 to 1714, there was a great conflict in Europe. Different countries tried to control the Spanish Empire. During this difficult period, the French king, Louis XIV, gave Levasseur a letter of marque. From that moment on, the future pirate became an official privateer of the French crown. Now, roughly speaking, a privateer is also a pirate, only working for his country. A privateer could use his vessel to attack enemy merchant vessels and had to share the spoils from those ships with the royal treasury. So Levasseur became a legalized pirate. The king provided him with a good ship and finances for effective work. According to legend, while serving the king, Levasseur got an eye injury and began wearing a blindfold. That's when the classic image of a pirate with a black eye patch appeared. But this story is a legend. Probably. Levasseur learned how to rob other people's ships quite effectively. His toughness and skill helped him get a lot of treasures. At some point, he didn't want to share the loot with his country, so he decided to turn from a privateer into a free pirate. In addition, he dreamed of long-distance voyages and adventures. He wanted to rob ships not only in European waters, but in the far reaches of the Caribbean and South America. His pirate life lasted about 15 to 17 years. According to stories, in the beginning, he joined the crew of English pirate Benjamin Hornigold. He also collaborated with Samuel Black Sam Bellamy, one of the richest pirates in history. He robbed ships along with the famous Edward Teach, who you probably know as Blackbeard. Having spent a lot of time with such famous pirates, Olivier Levasseur himself became famous for his thoughtful attacks, knowledge of maritime affairs, and compliance with the pirate code. There's a pirate code? More like guidelines. He ensured the order, discipline, and behavior of the crew. Thanks to this, he managed to commit one of the most daring robberies in history during the encounter with a Portuguese ship, NASA, etc. So the pirate hijacked the ship and grabbed all its goodies. The Viceroy of Goa and the Archbishop of Goa were also captured. The pirate released the Viceroy later for a big sum, but the fate of the Archbishop and the rest of the passengers remains, well, unknown. After that, the pirates sailed with the loot to the island of Sainte-Marie. In the 18th century, it was a place that no European colony paid attention to. There was no authority there, which is why pirates adored this crossroads in the Indian Ocean. Dozens of pirate crews used this place as a hangout. The anchorages of this island were located close to the main sea routes. This meant that pirates could quickly board their ship and set off to plunder vessels and then return. The fate of the NASA and its valuable cargo remained unknown. For more than 300 years, researchers and historians have been trying to find the treasure and have only recently come closer to the answer. The shipwreckage was found near the island of Nosy Baraha in a harbor about 400 miles west of the place where the pirates had attacked the ship. Using sonar and remote sensing, experts created a map of the seabed and found fragments of a ship similar to the wreckage of the NASA. They also found artifacts nearby. There were many wrecks of other ships in this region, so it took more than 2 decades to identify the find. Fortunately, the scientists were able to confirm that they had found the legendary ship. They discovered more than 3,000 objects and fragments that indicated that the wreckage belonged to the merchant vessel. Chinese porcelain, sculptures, ceramics, European coins, African shells, exotic spices, all this ended up on the seafloor. But where are the treasures that the pirates took? No one knows. But fortunately, we all have the opportunity to find out where one of the biggest pirate caches of all time is located. In 1724, an amnesty was granted to all pirates who sailed in the Indian Ocean. The French king freed them from persecution in exchange for the pirates sharing the loot. Levasseur didn't want to share with anyone and hid in a highland in the Seychelles. From that moment on, the hunt began for him. Levasseur managed to hide from the French authorities for several years, but then he was caught in Madagascar. On his last day, July 7, 1730, Levasseur ripped a necklace off his neck and threw it to a crowd of people. He said, "Find my treasure, the one who may understand it." The necklace contained a mysterious cipher which, according to the pirate, could lead to his hidden treasure. The cargo of the Nassau, worth $138 million, was far from the only loot. But where can we find all of it? Well, people are still trying to solve the mysterious cryptogram of Levasseur. However, many think that the story about the cipher is a fake. The first reports about it appeared only in the 1930s, so maybe it's all made-up rumors. Or
a ship is traveling across the Atlantic Ocean when a storm starts. At first, the situation doesn't seem to be very bad, but soon, people on board the ship realize that the storm is intensifying. Waves are huge, and nothing can save the ship. It's starting to sink. On board, there's only one lifeboat. Sadly, it can only hold one person. The captain is in a terrible situation. He needs to decide which passenger can be given a chance to survive. Besides the captain, there are 8 people on board. Some of them seem to be lovely, others look like villains. But you might not know the truth until it's too late. The first passenger is Alex, a 28-year-old talented artist. He's just had his first international exhibition and is boasting about that left and right. He claims to dream of inspiring the world with his art, but did I mention it's his shy twin brother who painted those masterpieces? And Alex just steals his shine? Next is 23-year-old Maria, who's 8 months pregnant. She's quite spoiled, often behaves unreasonably, and treats the staff on board badly. She's traveling home to her husband, but little does he know that the kid is not his, but his best friend's. And she's been cheating on him since forever. Though we can't let this innocent soul perish, can we? Despite his untidy appearance, this 65-year-old scientist, Professor Marcus, is a leading researcher in the field of gene therapy. He's working on a breakthrough that could save millions of lives, but there are skeletons in his closet too. It's been 15 years since anyone saw his wife, Judith. Does Marcus's scientific progress have something to do with the mysterious disappearance of his wife? Dr. Anna is 34 years old. She's a surgeon who's saved hundreds of lives during natural disasters. She succeeded as a doctor, but failed as a parent. Her 3 daughters live with their dad and don't want to hear anything about their mother. 78-year-old Teresa is a widow whose family gave up on her because of her bad temper. She's traveling for the last time in her life to visit her late husband's grave. A little boy, Mark, is just 7 years old, but his unruly character has caused a lot of arguments between the other passengers. He's traveling alone since his parents are supposed to meet him on the shore. This brat's parents are too busy working, so he gets more and more uncontrollable. Who knows what he'll be capable of doing in 10 years or so? A robot android, Alpha 3, is also on board the ship. It has an artificial intelligence created to assist in expeditions. It can also control the ship in emergency cases. And the last passenger is Emily. This beautiful and charming woman is 30 years old. She lives off of powerful, old, rich men and has enough money to burn. She hasn't worked a single day in her entire life and just travels the world. To make his choice, the captain invites each of the passengers to listen to their stories. He asks each of them just one question. Why would you be the one to survive? Alex says, "You see, my art can inspire and change the world. Looking at my works, they help people see the beauty of life, especially during difficult times. I must continue living. I have so much to show through my paintings." Maria answers, "Can't you see that a new life is growing inside my body? It's me and my unborn kid who must survive. We risk losing a talented doctor or an artist in the future. It's not just my life we're talking about." Professor Marcus says, My work is not finished yet. It might save thousands of lives. I'm close to a breakthrough, and I need to live to make it. Dr. Anna says, my hands save lives. I have proven many times that I can do the impossible in extreme conditions. The world can't lose my skills and knowledge. The elderly woman begs,
Please, you must understand me. I might have lived a long life, but I want to see my husband's grave.
Mark says,
I'm still a kid. My parents are waiting for me at home. I want to hug my mom and dad.
Alpha 3 states that it was created to serve and help people. Its ability to analyze situations and make rational decisions in a crisis can be used to prevent future disasters. Emily admits,
Look at me. Doesn't every person have their unique value? I'm young and beautiful, and I have a lot of potential. Surely you see it.
the captain is desperate. How can he, a mere mortal, decide who should live and who he should take this chance away from? After pacing his cabin and hitting the walls with his fists, he decides to, estimate passengers' value and see how useful they are. Alex, as a talented artist, can influence society through his art, providing inspiration for thousands of people who will see his masterpieces. But no one knows where his ego can bring him. Plus, remember who the real artist is. Saving Maria means saving her unborn child. But however cynical it may sound, the contribution of these two lives to the future of society is assumed, but not guaranteed. What if that child grows up to become a criminal? Professor Marcus can indeed provide significant benefits to society through his scientific research, but he isn't young. What if he doesn't live long enough to finish his work? Dr. Anna is a surgeon. She's already saved a lot of lives and will definitely continue to do so in the future. Her ability to provide immediate medical assistance in critical situations makes her one of the most valuable candidates for survival, since she can directly and regularly save lives. At the same time, she is a terrible mother, and it'll definitely influence the lives of her daughters. Teresa is living history and experience, but unfortunately, her ability to continue contributing to society is limited. In simple words, she's old, and we don't know how much time she has left. Mark is in a similar situation. He has the potential for a long and productive life, but his immediate contribution to society is limited. His survival is based on the potential for future contribution, which is difficult to estimate at the moment. Alpha 3 can provide valuable technical assistance and functional support, but as a robot, it does not add to human well-being directly. As for Emily, despite her beauty, her achievements are minimal. On the other hand, she's only dating wealthy and influential people, and thus has a lot of influence on society of her own. Now, from the perspective of how much profit each of the passengers can bring, saving Dr. Anna seems to be one of the most logical choices. Her knowledge and skills can save many lives in the future, which means the greatest good for the greatest number. But let's have a look at the captain's choice. In the end, after listening to all the passengers and pressed for time, the man decides to save Emily. Can you figure out why he's made such an unexpected choice? Write your answer in the comments below. You can also pause the video to think it over. Okay, I suppose you're ready for the answer to be revealed. You see, even though each passenger presented very compelling arguments for why they should be saved, the captain was particularly moved by Emily's charm and attractiveness. And even though there were more logical candidates in terms of utilitarianism and humanism, the captain succumbed to his personal feelings and preferences, which influenced his decision. This riddle illustrates that in real life, people often make choices based on their sympathies and preferences rather than logic or public benefit. This is because emotions and personal relationships can have a strong influence on our perception of situations and decision-making. Here's a real-life example. HR managers tend to choose candidates they like or share common interests with. and it doesn't matter that other candidates might have more suitable skills or experience. This phenomenon is known as the similarity effect. Now, I've got an important question for you. Which passenger would you save? Share your choice in the comments. But I'd like to remind you that there is no correct answer.
In 1945, 5 TBF Avenger aircraft took flight for a routine training exercise around the Bermuda Triangle. In the middle of the exercise, the planes were struck by intense rain and heavy winds, despite the clear weather forecast. The pilots became extremely disoriented and radioed the base to report that their navigational equipment had stopped working. The last thing the base heard was, "When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we'll all go down together," and then static. The 5 planes and their 14 crew members were never seen or heard from again. On his very first voyage to the New World in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed through the Bermuda Triangle. Columbus reported that one night when he was on the deck of the ship, he noticed a giant light appear in the distance, unlike anything he had ever seen before. Columbus looked at his compass for direction, and it gave off erratic readings. You might have noticed that the Bermuda Triangle doesn't appear on any world map. This is because official institutions refuse to acknowledge that the area actually exists. A popular theory suggests that rogue waves are responsible for the many disappearances. Rogue waves are called extreme storm waves by scientists. They occur when different weather patterns take place at the same time and cause large unexpected waves. Witnesses say that the waves look like giant walls of water. These waves could explain why ships go down fast and without leaving any trace. The Bermuda Triangle is home to some pretty intense and unexpected weather. Storms build up quickly and unexpectedly, then disappear soon after. If you blink, you might miss it. This could explain why few distress signals are issued. Pilots and sailors never saw the weather coming. No one knows exactly how many ships and planes have disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. The rough estimate is 50 ships and 20 planes. Most of the time, the disappearances had no explanation and no wreckage has ever been left behind. Another bizarre theory trying to solve the Bermuda Triangle mystery comes from Charlie Berlitz. He insists that the area is home to the lost city of Atlantis. The missing ships and planes and malfunctioning equipment, according to him, were all caused by rays of energy let out by the special energy crystals that power Atlantis. While this sounds silly, Berlitz's theory was convincing enough that over 20 million people bought his book worldwide. In the year 1800, a large sailing vessel called the USS Pickering departed from the U.S. on its way to the West Indies. The ship sailed into the Bermuda Triangle along with its 90-man crew and was never heard from again. The USS Pickering was the first ever confirmed ship to vanish in the Bermuda Triangle. It's believed that the ship was taken out by a storm, but because no wreckage was ever found, we'll never know for sure. When the TBF Avenger planes went missing, a massive search operation was conducted. Boats and planes searched the Bermuda Triangle for any signs of the aircraft. One of the boats searching was a PBM-5 Mariner airboat. The airboat took flight at 7:27 p.m. and called in a routine radio message 3 minutes later. Then, it was never heard from again. No trace was ever found of the rescue airboat or the 5 Avenger aircraft. An enormous investigation was launched into the disappearance of all these vehicles, but nothing was ever discovered. This particular area of the ocean is one of the most heavily traveled shipping routes in the world. Some skeptics believe that this fact solves the mystery. Statistically, the busier the area, the higher the frequency of accidents and disappearances. While this makes sense, it's not the frequency of disappearances that's responsible for the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. It's the lack of explanation or wreckage found. On the ocean floor, decomposing organisms let off large concentrations of methane gas that gets trapped under the water. This gas can build up until, boom, it ruptures. The gas surges up to the surface and erupts. If a ship was in the area of one of these ruptures, the water would become much less dense and cause the ship to sink rapidly and without warning. Scientists believe this could be the cause of the many disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. While this theory makes a lot of sense, it doesn't seem too likely. The U.S. Geological Survey has stated that no large releases of gas are believed to have occurred in this area for the past 15,000 years. The ocean floor is made of rocks containing a lot of magnetite. It's more like iron. Magnetic fields react to high concentrations of magnetite on the ocean floor, which may start a sort of conflict between the two. It can often lead to various weather anomalies and, as a result, navigation issues. And, naturally, any changes in the ocean floor or the Earth's magnetic fields influence the Bermuda Triangle a lot. Since the magnetic field is constantly moving, it might be also taking the Bermuda Triangle with it. Now that people know where the triangle is, it's easy to avoid it. It supposedly moves eastward together with the magnetic poles, but scientists still can't answer where exactly it will be in a couple of years. Some people blame all the disasters on the extraterrestrial paranormal activity. Others suppose it's all about raging natural phenomena. There's another triangle in Lake Michigan. Just like the one near Bermuda, the Michigan Triangle got its shady reputation for some disappearances. The first recorded one dates back to 1679. A large vessel, one of the largest of that time, set out on an expedition. Yet, once it got in the sinister triangle, it never came back. Much later, an aircraft disappeared in this triangle. The skies are usually very clear there, but back in 1883, some people witnessed abnormal things in the area. Some claim to have seen large blocks of ice falling from the skies, and the crew even managed to save one as hard proof. Meanwhile, the Pacific Ocean Mystery Area is another sinister triangle. Off the south coast of Japan, not far away from Tokyo, there's a sea where plenty of ships met their doom, disappearing without a trace in these waters. They call it the Devil's Triangle. Some scientists believe the cause of anomalies is the environmental changes. Also, there's a really high concentration of methane hydrates on the bottom of the ocean in the Pacific Triangle area. You're deviating from your original course and sailing in the wrong direction. There's the Caribbean Sea near the triangle, peppered with small islands. The seafloor here isn't deep. The ship can get in shallow waters. And now the ship is stuck on a shoal, and you have no idea where you are. If this were the 21st century, the ship's captain would be able to reach the shore using GPS and other modern navigation. But the most interesting thing is that the compass would work correctly this time, since the magnetic North Pole hasn't already coincided with the true one for a long time in the territory of the Bermuda Triangle. The agonic line is somewhere far away from here. There are no problems with navigation now, but for some reason, this is where ships disappear. In fact, not just here. Throughout the Atlantic Ocean, there are places where many more ships were gone. The Bermuda Triangle is not even in the top 10 of such places. One of the main reasons why many ships are lost here is that one of the most popular shipping routes in the Atlantic passes through the Bermuda Triangle. And the more ships in one place, the more shipwrecks. Simple probability. Then, it just starts getting weird. Other theories say that there's a space-time rift in this region. Ships and planes fall into this rift and end up in the past or the future. But for some reason, there's not a single proof of this myth. There's no reason to think that the rift is hidden somewhere here. The base of an extraterrestrial civilization is located in the Bermuda Triangle. Visitors from other galaxies steal sea vessels along with the crew, so no one finds the wreckage of the ships. This is also a popular myth that has no scientific justification. The Kraken lives somewhere in the triangle. It's a huge squid that sinks ships and also is a legend that sailors tell each other. However, gigantic squids live in the depths of the ocean. They can grow to the size of half a train car, but no cases have ever been recorded where they sunk a large vessel. And in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, they have never ever been seen. People in the past didn't know about the existence of these creatures, so when they saw them for the first time, they described them as huge, terrible monsters. Giant squids are some of the most elusive creatures on Earth, and scientists had to use sonar equipment to find them. They don't like to leave the dark depths and are likely to be afraid of the sound of any ship. So, that should squash the squid as a suspect.
Nearly 140 years ago, some fishermen pulled pieces of a ship from Lake Michigan. But where was the rest of it? From that moment on, hunters spent years searching for the ghost ship. By the 1970s, the hunt reached a new level. One with a $1,000 reward offered to anyone who could find it. Still, nothing. It was as if the vessel had simply vanished into thin air. That is, until now. Researchers have finally found the shipwreck off the coast of Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin. The ship called the F.J. King disappeared back in 1886. At that time, this 140-foot-long vessel had a very important job: transporting grain. Now you might think, grain? Really? That's it? Okay, sure, it's not like the ship was loaded with tons of gold or jewels. But we have to see the bigger picture. At that time, Wisconsin was known as America's breadbasket. The state produced huge amounts of food, especially wheat. In fact, about 1/6 of the nation's wheat was being harvested there. Farming was booming, and that of course meant big money. The F.J. King was part of that golden era.
For about 19 years, it successfully carried and traded grain and iron ore through the Welland Canal. That is, until September 15, 1886. That day, the crew were on their journey to carry iron ore from Michigan to Chicago. It was supposed to be just another routine trip, but they were caught in a powerful storm. The conditions were brutal, with waves nearly 10 feet high. The crew fought desperately to get the water out and keep the ship afloat, but the waves were too strong. They kept coming, one after another. The men worked hard until they couldn't go on anymore. The waves were splitting the ship's seams. At this point, a catastrophe was inevitable. So Captain William Griffin gave the order: abandon ship. They had no choice but to get out. The men grabbed their belongings as fast as they could and climbed into the ship's small yawl boat. It was 2 a.m. Everything around them was dark. As they tried to get closer to shore, the F.J. King went down, bow first. And then suddenly, boom! The crew watched in shock as the ship's stern deckhouse blew off, sending the captain's papers 50 feet into the air. They stayed in the small boat until they were picked up by a passing schooner called La Petite. The crew took them to Bailey's Harbor, and moments later, Captain Griffin filed a wreck report. That's when the real mystery began. In his report, the captain said the ship had gone down about 5 miles off the shore of Lake Michigan. But that was just what he thought. I mean, it wasn't based on any instruments, readings, or anything like that. It was just what he remembered from that night. A week later, though, a local lighthouse keeper spotted the masts of a schooner sticking out of the water, much closer to shore. He reported it to a nearby newspaper, and that's when people really started asking questions. Could that be the F.J. King? Even though they had a solid lead, it didn't take them anywhere. No one could find the boat. Days passed, then months, then years, until 2025. That's when an investigator named Brendan Baylod decided enough was enough. He gathered a team of about 20 scientists and historians to finally track down this historic shipwreck. They dug through hundreds of original documents about the ship and the day it went down, piecing together clues and narrowing down the area where it might be. Many experts were like, "Man, just let it go." And to be fair, they had every reason to feel discouraged. After all, that whole area had already been searched over and over. There was just no way the ship could still be out there. But Bayod didn't give up. Okay, truth is, he also thought it was a long shot. But working to find the ghost ship had other perks. His team wanted to get some hands-on experience with a brand new super advanced sonar. With that in mind, they set out on their mission, heading to Lake Michigan on June 28th. Okay, great. But where do you even start? First, Bayod had to clear something up. Back when the wreck happened, who was actually telling the truth about the ship's location? The captain or the lighthouse keeper? Getting that answer would point them in the right direction. Then, Bayod thought about something that might have already crossed your mind. How could the captain really know where they were? It was pitch black. He'd just been struggling to keep his ship afloat. He couldn't see much. He was exhausted and probably hungry. He definitely wasn't thinking straight. That's when the investigator realized the lighthouse keeper's directions were probably more accurate. Thankfully, he found the newspaper article from 1886. You know, the one I mentioned earlier, where the lighthouse keeper gave a more specific detail about where he'd last seen the ship's masts. What the investigator did next was draw a 2-square-mile grid around that location, and the team decided to map the lake bottom inside that grid using their fancy tech. So, there they were, aboard the Shoreline, a tour boat that usually carries sightseers along the peninsula. But that day, they didn't really expect to find anything. Their only goal that afternoon was to test their new side-scan sonar, one with much greater capability than the previous model the crew had been using. But then, after about 2 hours of searching, something strange happened. The sonar was sending out sound waves to map the dark floor of Lake Michigan when it started to act a little differently. And as the images began to stitch together, they revealed a shape that was impossible to mistake. A ship. Bingo. They'd found it. Turns out the wreck was less than half a mile from where the lighthouse keeper had said it would be. At this point, some of the crew had to pinch each other. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were shocked, not only because they'd found the ship so quickly, but also because of how well it was preserved. You see, the investigators were hopeful, but they also thought the ship would be shattered into pieces. After all, it had been carrying iron ore, and the weight of all that metal could have torn it apart even more. But no. To everyone's surprise, the hull was almost completely intact. Sure, the front right side was crushed, but the rest of it was pretty much there. The investigators even found the crew's belongings and kitchenware scattered across the lake bottom. Once they got over the shock, they called in archaeologists to examine the site and create a 3-dimensional model of the wreck. This is the 5th major shipwreck Bayod and his team have found in the last 3 years, but the truth is, this region is full of mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. The F.J. King is just one of around 6,000 ships that were damaged or destroyed in incidents across the Great Lakes during the 1800s. And it's estimated that hundreds of these wrecks still remain hidden at the bottom of Lakes Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Thankfully, discoveries like this one could become more and more common. In fact, more shipwrecks are being found today than at any other time in history. Advances in technology have made scanning the lake floor less expensive and more accessible, not just for professionals, but for amateurs too. And the profile of these modern-day shipwreck hunters has changed. Now, they're more often searching for wrecks for their historical value, not just to find treasure. Another project that could help uncover even more wrecks in the Great Lakes is called Lakebed 2030. It could change everything, as its goal is to map the entire lake floor. And right now, only about 15% has been explored. That means the Great Lakes might still be hiding their biggest secrets, and that, at the very least, is super exciting.
They said it was the most technologically advanced ship. They said it was unsinkable. And when it sank, they made a movie about it. These were the main reasons why the Titanic disaster became world famous. But unfortunately, this is not the only large-scale shipwreck. And sadly, there have been cases much worse than the tragedy of the Titanic. One of them occurred on April 27, 1865. The Sultana steamboat carried passengers and cargo daily between St. Louis and New Orleans. It was a pretty large wooden boat with 3 decks and was 260 feet long and 70 feet wide, almost twice the size of a basketball court. The ship could carry about 350 passengers, but on that unfortunate day, more than 2,000 people were on it. On April 23rd, she was making a routine voyage from New Orleans when it broke down. Something was wrong with the boiler, so the vessel docked in Vicksburg for repairs. At the port, the ship's captain, James Cass Mason, found out about an excellent opportunity to earn a lot of money. All he needed to do was to transfer a large group of former prisoners to the north. The captain agreed to do it, but the problem was that the boiler required a lot of time to repair. Mason was afraid that his competitors would take the job, so he decided to sail despite the malfunction the ship had. He patched up the holes in the boiler instead of a big repair and invited all the ex-prisoners on board. So, there was a broken boiler, an excess number of passengers, a lack of lifeboats, and not the best river conditions. Also, the captain refused to send the ex-prisoners to the hold, so they were all with ordinary passengers. There were strong chances for a shipwreck, but the greedy desire to earn more money was stronger. The Sultana went on a voyage and sailed up the river for 2 days. At this time, one of the biggest Mississippi floods in history began. The river overflowed its shores because of the flood, with the water level rising several feet. All the trees on the shore disappeared, and only the tops were sticking out of the water. The ship sailed opposite this powerful current, making the boiler work too hard. On the evening of April 26th, the Sultana arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, and they loaded even more, 120 tons of sugar and 200 passengers. She got incredibly heavy. Around midnight, the ship continued its dangerous journey. The captain sailed to barges to load a shipment of coal. At 1 a.m., the vessel left the barge. At 2 a.m., the broken boiler, unable to withstand the load, suddenly exploded. The Sultana was just 7 miles north of Memphis. Few people survived that day. The problem was that passengers trying to escape from the fire jumped into a cold river with a strong current. The Sultana disaster is considered the most tragic shipwreck in the history of the United States. The exact number of those who didn't survive is still unknown. According to various sources, this number was from 961 to 1,800 people. Don't be surprised that almost no one knows this story. There were many more survivors in the Titanic tragedy, and everybody heard about it. But the Sultana sank during one high-profile event. 12 days before the shipwreck, the country lost Abraham Lincoln. People hadn't yet recovered from this news, so no one paid much attention to the tragedy of the Sultana. Many catastrophes happened quite recently by historical standards. One of them occurred in 2002. The ferry La Jula was a Senegalese vessel. The ferry sailed twice a week, mainly along the coast of Dakar, carrying passengers who traded mango and palm oil. It made daily voyages and never faced severe problems thanks to modern rescue equipment and good repair service. But one day, the ship's crew discovered a malfunction and sent the boat to port. For almost a year, La Jula was in a non-working condition, awaiting repairs. But it didn't get high-quality service. After poor maintenance, the ferry set off on its last voyage. On September 26, 2002, La Jula sailed between southern Senegal and Dakar, and at 11 p.m. headed toward Gambia, where a strong storm began. The wind raised high waves, but this wasn't critical for the large passenger ship unless the number of people on board didn't exceed the established norm. La Jula was supposed to carry about 500 passengers, but had many more people that day. Too many passengers, poor repairs, and a strong storm caused severe problems for the ship. But the main factor in the shipwreck was that La Jula was only built for sailing in coastal waters, but that day, it sailed far from the shore. Big waves started rocking the boat, and at some point, it just turned upside down. The ship's deck went underwater, and its lower part stuck above the surface like an iceberg. All the passengers sitting in cabins fell on the ceiling and lost their orientation in space. There were no holes or damage in the ship's hull, and water flooded the lower decks for a long time. The vessel stood in a twisted position for several hours. Then, the boat began to sink when the water seeped through the deck and hold. The ocean was warm, but no one came to save the passengers. People had to wait almost 4 days to be rescued. Unfortunately, only a few managed to survive. The Philippines is a very dangerous area for ships. This place consists of several thousand islands and a vast area with shallow water. Ships can run aground and damage the hull with reefs and pitfalls. On September 20th, 1987, one of the most terrible disasters in navigation history occurred there. A Philippine passenger ferry called Dona Paz left one of the islands and sailed toward Manila. The sun was shining, the ocean was calm, and the visibility was good. But for some reason, the crew members didn't notice how the tanker Vector was approaching them. The two ships collided at low speed. The collision wasn't strong, but the problem was that the Vector had tons of oil on board, and the Dona Paz crashed into the cargo hold where that oil was stored. So it spilled all over the ocean, and then a spark slipped through. Not only did the two ships catch fire, but also filled with water. Both ships sank in a matter of seconds. Only a few dozen people survived that disaster. On September 27, 1854, the passenger ship Arctic sailed from Liverpool to New York. The fog came rolling down, and visibility got really bad. Another boat appeared out of the thick white haze, the French steamer Vesta. The ships were close enough to each other that a collision was inevitable. The French vessel was smaller, so it seemed to the Arctic's captain that Vesta had received a lot of damage. And while he was staring at the other ship, his boat got quickly filled with water. The captain gave the order to sail to the shore as fast as possible, but the ship's engines stopped working because of the flood. Then the ship's crew started to lower lifeboats with women and kids. Still, when rescuers found lifeboats with people, it turned out that only 87 out of 400 people survived, 65 crew members and 22 passengers. Surprisingly, there were only grown men among them. The ship's captain survived by clinging to the wreckage. All newspapers wrote about this story as one of the most terrible and shameful tragedies in navigation history. The survivors were criticized because they didn't save women and kids, and the crew members were accused of violating the law, since the safety of passengers should be higher than the safety of sailors. But despite this, none of them were brought to responsibility. Unfortunately, shipwrecks still occur to this day, but fortunately, there are fewer of them than before, thanks to modern navigation systems and radar. But no technology can guarantee there won't be a super strong storm or any other emergency that no one can foresee.
As an experienced sailor and the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, Matt Rutherford has seen a lot during his voyages. But what he saw in 2013 while sailing through the waters of the Atlantic with his colleague surely stands out. Some 800 miles off the coast of Bermuda, not far away from the famous Bermuda Triangle, they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails weren't up and the motor wasn't running. The sailors decided to check if there was someone who needed their help aboard, so they moved closer to the mysterious ship. Once they got there, things only got weirder, as they realized there wasn't a living soul aboard. Rutherford started filming to document their discovery. The boat looked so awfully abandoned that they expected to find some pretty scary things in there. But it didn't stop Rutherford from searching the vessel. The boat, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, probably costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was pretty weird to find it floating by itself in the middle of the ocean. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. The brave sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. What really happened and how Wolfhound ended up in the middle of the ocean will probably remain a mystery. Rumor has it that it belonged to a member of the Royal Irish Yacht Club. The ship was going on its first voyage from Connecticut to Bermuda and then Antigua. It got in a terrible storm around 400 miles away from Delaware. The winds were so strong that the yacht suffered 2 knockdowns. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew. They left the ship with an emergency beacon on. The rescued crew members shared that they saw the ship sink, which only adds more questions to the story. How did it get back to the surface? Does the Bermuda Triangle have anything to do with that? Christopher Columbus himself reported some unusual compass activity going on in this mysterious area while he was on his way to the New World. Despite the stories of more than 50 ships and 20 planes disappearing in the area, it remains one of the most heavily traveled shipping routes in the world. Some skeptics believe that this fact solves the Bermuda Triangle mystery. It could make sense because the busier the area, the more accidents happen there. But then again, it's not the number of disappearances that makes the place so mysterious. It's the lack of explanation and wreckage lost for good. The first ever confirmed ship to vanish in the Bermuda Triangle was the USS Pickering. In 1800, it departed from the US on its way to the West Indies. The ship sailed into the Bermuda Triangle along with its 90-man crew. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. The popular explanation is that the ship was taken out by a storm. But because no one found any wreckage, we'll never know for sure. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area was the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. The ship passed through the Bermuda Triangle on its journey and vanished into thin air, or rather, water. The Cyclops never sent any distress signal and disappeared without any explanation or trace. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only place in the world where ships go missing or mysteriously resurface. One of the most famous ghost ship stories would be of SS Beijimo. The large cargo steamer was built in Sweden. On October 1st, 1931, it got caught in pack ice. The crew decided to wait it out and managed to break free after a couple of days, only to get trapped again in less than a week. This time, they didn't manage to make it out. A rescue team went by air to save 22 of the crew members. 15 other members stayed in a wooden shelter they built not far away from the ship. Their plan was to wait out the winter and get back aboard. At the end of November, a strong blizzard was rushing through the area. When it was over, Beijimo seemed to have gone away with the storm. The captain decided it must have broken and sunk. But a few days later, a local hunter informed them that he had seen the ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew managed to find the ship and took the most valuable cargo from its hold. They had fears that Beijimo wouldn't live through that rough water, but it did manage to survive after all. Once the ice was gone, it floated away and ended up drifting along the shores of Canada and Alaska. Many people reported seeing the ghost ship in an open sea. Some even tried to board it to save the ship, but the weather didn't allow it to happen. The last time someone saw SS Beijimo was in 1969, 38 years after its crew had left it. It could still be drifting somewhere in the ocean. The story of MV Hoita happened in the South Pacific. The ship was originally a wooden luxury yacht. After serving for 20 years to various owners, it became a merchant ship. In 1959, it set on a trading voyage that was supposed to last around 2 days. When it didn't reach its destination on time, no one was worried at first, as things happen in the open waters. After another day, and no distress signals from the Hoita, it was obvious that something serious was going on with it. There were 25 people aboard, and their families wanted to find them. A search and rescue crew worked for 6 days looking for the ship, or at least its wreckage, in an area of nearly 100,000 square miles. That's 1.5 times as big as Florida. Sadly, the mission had come back with no results. It seemed like Hoita had disappeared without a trace. A month later, another merchant ship noticed Hoita drifting in the ocean, miles and miles away from its original route, and none of the crew members or passengers were on board. The cargo had also disappeared. The lifeboats were also gone, so the people must have escaped the ship hoping to save themselves. It turned out that the crew had been trying to get help as they tuned the radio to the International Distress Channel. But the damaged cable didn't let them send the signal any further than 2 miles. It also looked like when they were leaving the ship, the crew took the logbook with them, and we still don't know what exactly happened to Hoita. Family members of those who were on board are still looking for answers. One professor claims it must have been a corroded pipe that leaked and flooded the vessel, but we'll most likely never know for sure. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there is an area nicknamed the Devil's Sea. It's believed to be one of the 12 vile vortices around the Earth. Some people claim that vile vortices have weird things going on in them because the pull of the planet's electromagnetic waves is stronger there than anywhere else. The most famous ship that disappeared in the area was a fishery patrol vessel in 1952. The ship went there to investigate the vessels that went missing previously and disappeared along with 31 crew members. Scientists who don't believe it was a mysterious disappearance blame the underwater volcano eruption for what happened.
The year was 1854, and the SS Arctic, the fastest passenger liner of its time, set out to cross the Atlantic. As it sailed through the misty veil, it slowly disappeared into the unknown. The Collins Line, an American shipping company, was started in 1818 and only began seriously trading in the transatlantic by 1835. Its steamships crossed the Atlantic from Liverpool to New York within just 10 days. Doesn't sound like a great speed today, I know, but back then, the same thing took other ships several weeks. Light on the water with their wooden hulls, powering through with a strong steam engine, those steamships were the favorite choice for many high-profile people. What could go wrong with such an advanced ship, they thought. This reminds me of some other ship everyone believed to be unsinkable. But anyway, back to the Collins Line. It grew to be a serious contender on transatlantic routes, with only one other competitor, the Cunard's Line. It was a British company also aiming to be the main force through the Arctic Passage. In 1835, the company received a new ship that traveled to Liverpool and came back to New York with the largest cargo ever at that time. From then, the Collins Line was steadily growing. It seemed like there would only be future successes for it. Unfortunately, their lavish ships became costly to run with the amount of coal used. Massive power along with weak wooden hulls meant they needed many repairs after each voyage. So, every trip ended up being expensive. But since the ships were safe and had a great reputation, people were willing to pay the price, and the company was definitely not in crisis. They had achieved something no one had managed to do before them. Like I told you, their ships crossed the Atlantic in a whopping 10 days, and Edward Collins, the owner, was very determined to maintain the pace. Their 5 ships easily outran the Cunard's Line of only 3. With this great praise, it provided more attention. Though the Cunard's ships were slower with their iron hulls, they believed there was still profit, regardless of how slowly they sailed. Among Collins' ships, the Arctic, the third of them to be launched, was the largest, reaching 284 feet long, with 2 side-lever steam engines, each with 1,000 horsepower. The paddle wheels made 16 revolutions a minute when at full speed. At the time of its launch, the press called it the most stupendous vessel ever constructed in the United States. But glamour and fame couldn't avoid what would come next. On the 27th of September, the Arctic was on its journey from Liverpool to New York, continuing a speed pace through the thick fog. It's possible that by that moment, after 4 years of record-breaking trips, the crew became overconfident with their sailing and the ship. Going only 50 miles from Newfoundland, they carelessly continued through the fog with no radio contact, sonar, or any other form of identifying objects, equipped only with Morse code. A smaller ship, the SS Vesta, which operated as a fishing vessel, often worked around Newfoundland. It was passing through the same path as the Arctic and crashed into its side. Shocked by the collision, the captain of the Arctic offered help to the much smaller Vesta, but it was soon clear that the damage that seemed minor on the Arctic was far worse. Beneath the waterline, a hole was letting water into the hull. The cost of the much faster wooden hull now seemed less valuable. They steered toward land, trying to plug the holes, but they weren't doing so well, and the seawater continued to pour in, filling up higher and pushing the ship down. And finally, once the engine room was full, it put out the boilers, taking away the massive power the Arctic was once legendary for. They moved slowly until coming to a complete stop. The ship continued to sink, and the order was to abandon it. At the time, maritime law allowed for the Arctic to carry only 6 lifeboats, only capable of saving 180 people. The crew and some of the passengers managed to push their way aboard and took most of the seats on those boats. Things were pretty wild, and everyone forgot about their manners, not letting the ladies and the youngest ones board first. It took 4 hours for the Arctic to sink. 150 crew and 250 passengers were on board. Those that weren't able to find a lifeboat made a desperate attempt to build their own rafts from parts of the ship. 2 days later, only 3 boats made it safely to the shore. The other 3 were never found. Believe it or not, the rescue party also saved some people that had been clinging to the wreckage for 2 days. Unlike the crew, the captain went down with the Arctic, but amazingly survived. He would be only one of 85 people that made it, out of the 400 on board. When the news arrived 2 weeks later, the public responded with great sadness to the losses. Great anger soon followed towards the poor safety measures in the crew. The press published demands to change the laws for more lifeboats. It only made sense to have enough for every person on board a ship. But they ignored those requests. This neglect would lead to more disasters in the future. Enough lifeboats would only come into maritime law some 60 years later, after the disaster of the Titanic. Edward Collins' wife and 2 children were also aboard the ship and didn't return. He was heartbroken, but didn't stop running his business. The Collins line still had a reputation to uphold, the biggest, fastest, and most luxurious on the Atlantic. Edward Collins would now build an even better ship than any other. It was named the Adriatic, and it was the largest ship in the world, 354 feet long. With 2 alternating steam engines that had never been built of this size. These steam engines at the time were at the height of engineering, though today you can only see them in models and toys. With the new addition of 2 masts, the Adriatic would also be able to sail if needed. Luckily, they made some lessons from the disaster of the Arctic. But before their new ship, the Adriatic, was built, another disaster had occurred. The sister ship of the Arctic had also sunk. They believed this second ship was desperate to stay in front of the Cunard's line and hit an iceberg somewhere during the race. This weird contest took the lives of 141 people. The desperation of Collins and his weakly built hulls pushed the company towards bankruptcy in 1858. The newly built Adriatic, costing over $1 million, had only made 1 voyage in the end. And even that voyage was considered a disaster. The ship collided with a tugboat. It still managed to finish its maiden voyage at a suitable time. After the company had gone bankrupt, they had to sell the ship for only $50,000. They removed the great giant engines, replacing them with only sails. Although it was once the greatest ship on the high seas, it was only 30 years later until it was abandoned, labeled irreparable, and anchored in a river. The other remaining ships were also sold and only used for parts. Edward Collins left the industry altogether, seeking work on dry land instead. As the Collins line was no longer in the mix, the Cunards would grow in strength. Without competition, they would win the Blue Riband for the next 30 years, and 180 years later, after producing hundreds of ships. They still have a constant presence on the seas as they provide transatlantic crossings, world voyages, and leisure cruises. To this day, the Cunard line is the only one to run ships between Europe and America, and it's great proof that it's not always the fastest that's the best.
The Costa Concordia.
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 Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia.
Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia disaster is a tragedy that took dozens of lives, yet went down as completely avoidable and should have never happened. The disaster was caused by the captain going off course, and it wasn't to dodge an iceberg or fix an engine issue. He wanted to pull a flashy stunt called a sail-by salute. That's when a massive cruise ship sails way too close to shore so people on land can wave. Unfortunately, it became the most catastrophic high in history, claiming 32 lives. It was 2012. Over 4,000 people boarded the Costa Concordia for a chill 7-day Mediterranean cruise. But Captain Francesco Schettino wasn't content with just following a safe, boring route. So, on January 13th, after leaving Civitavecchia, Italy, he steered toward Giulio Island to pull off his grand salute. Did he have authorization? Nope. So he ordered the crew to change course, and it went something like, "Listen guys, let's head this way." But the helmsman heard "that way," and without a translator handy, the ship took the wrong turn straight into the rocks. There was a magic show going on when the lights suddenly went out. At first, people thought it was part of the act, but then came a horrendous, loud crash, and everyone started to panic. The ship rolled onto its side, and suddenly, it became impossible to access lifeboats. Some passengers had no choice but to jump into the cold sea and swim for land. And this wasn't just cold water, it was hypothermia cold, the kind that freezes your muscles and shuts down your arms and legs in minutes. And to make things worse, the ship hadn't even run an emergency drill, so it was total chaos. At some point, Captain Schettino abandoned the ship. Later, he blamed the disaster not on himself, but on the rocks. Yes, he literally said the rocks weren't marked on his charts, and that was the real problem. After the disaster, cruise lines tightened their safety rules. So now every passenger has to do a muster drill before any cruise ship even leaves port. A little late, but at least they finally figured that one out.
On December 19, more than 1,500 people perished.
Now, if you thought the Costa Concordia was bad, meet Doña Paz. This was chaos on a whole new level. So much so, it holds the world record for the largest maritime disaster ever in terms of lives lost. And if you're looking for someone to blame the must-see movie the captain chose to watch instead of, steering. Officially, this passenger ferry could carry about 1,500 people. But somehow, more than 4,000 ended up on board. It was basically a human sardine can on water. There weren't enough beds, so passengers slept in the hallways, on the decks, and sometimes 3 or 4 had to share one bunk. And to complete the disaster starter pack, rumor has it the ship didn't even have a working radio, and the life jackets were locked away. Oh, perfect. It was December 20th, 1987. The Doña Paz set off across the Tabla Strait in the Philippines. For hours, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, at about 10:30 that night, the ferry slammed into an oil tanker, the MT Vector. The problem is that Vector was carrying over 1,000 tons of gasoline. Yep, gasoline. So you see where this is going, right? After the collision, flames quickly spread to both ships and across the water around them. The captain, meanwhile, was in his bedroom watching a movie, and most of the crew was busy partying, which means nobody with real experience was even monitoring the ship when it crashed. So, when chaos broke out, even the crew panicked. Now, remember that whole women and children first code from Titanic? Here it was more like every man for himself. There were no orders, no evacuation plan, no leadership. Passengers were trapped with literally nowhere to run. Some were forced to jump off the ship, only to land in flaming waters. Others didn't even have time to react. Out of more than 4,000 people on board, only 25 survived. What we learned from this disaster is that, yes, there is a limit to how many people you can fit onto one ship. Afterward, the Philippine maritime industry finally enforced stricter safety standards and got a lot tougher about passenger limits. So no, you won't be sharing a bunk with a random stranger if you get on a ship there today. If the Danya Paz is known as Asia's Titanic, then the MV Lejula is Africa's version of it. In 2002, this ferry was supposed to make a trip from Ziguinchor to Dakar. The Lejula was designed to carry about 580 passengers, but on the day of the disaster, it had more than 3 times that number on board. So, from the moment it left port, the ship was already leaning to one side. To escape the hot, overcrowded cabins, many passengers gathered on the upper deck, where students were chatting, playing cards, or flirting far from their parents' eyes. But when night fell, those life is good vibes disappeared fast. Dark clouds rolled in, and strong winds started rocking the ferry. As rain started pounding the Lejula's deck, hundreds of passengers rushed inside. Then the ship suddenly tilted hard to the left, and water came pouring in. The cargo hadn't been tied down properly, so it all slid to one side. Even a heavy generator broke loose, and suddenly everything went dark. Panic spread. People grabbed onto anything they could, railings, ropes, other passengers, but the ship tipped too far. Within minutes, the ferry capsized off the coast of Gambia. Most of the travelers were trapped inside. Only 64 people survived. Even after 2 decades, no one has truly been held accountable. Some blame bad weather, but others say it was human error, and honestly, there were plenty of those. Too many people on board, warnings ignored, and a painfully slow rescue. Let's just hope nothing that tragic ever happens again. The last disaster on our list changed South Korea. We're talking about the MV Sewol. It was April 2014. A ferry carrying 476 people, mostly high school students, was supposed to be a fun trip to Jeju Island. You know, selfies, snacks, sea breeze. But instead, 304 people never made it home. Those who did survive were mostly rescued by random fishing boats and commercial ships nearby, because the official rescue team took about 30 minutes to show up. That's right, 30 minutes. And that delay was just one piece of a much bigger mess. This was a completely preventable disaster from the start. The trip started out fine. Then, around 8:48 in the morning, the Sewol made a sharp turn and suddenly started tilting. But how sharp does a turn have to be to tip a massive ship like that? I mean, it's not a kayak. So clearly, something was already off. Turns out the Sewol had been modified, like a DIY job gone wrong. The owners wanted more room for cargo and passengers, so they rebuilt the upper decks and boosted its capacity by over 100 people. Oh, and on that day, the cargo wasn't even properly tied down. So yeah, it was a disaster waiting to happen. When the ship tilted, all that extra cargo slid to one side, making it lean even more. Water rushed in, flooding passenger compartments. The ferry started sinking within minutes. The passengers panicked, but then they heard the instructions over the intercom. Everyone, stay where you are. Don't move. It's safer in your cabins. Well, it wasn't. While hundreds of students followed orders and waited for help, the captain and several crew members escaped. Yeah, they got off the ship while teenagers were still trapped inside. When rescue teams finally arrived, it was too late for most. The Seawell disaster shocked an entire nation, but it also brought people together. It sparked new laws, better training, and a promise that no ship would ever sail that recklessly again.
At the beginning of the 20th century, somewhere off the coast of West Africa, a German steamship was leaving the port. Suddenly, the weather got worse, and the vessel entered a thick fog. The sailors ran aground on a sandbank close to the shore. Luckily, no one was hurt, and they were even able to save their precious cargo. But the ship was stuck in the sand for good. And it was not alone there. Nearly the entire length of the western coast of Namibia is called Skeleton Coast. If the name sounds scary, that's because it is. This 976-mile-long beach line is among the most dangerous places on Earth. The local Bushman tribes believe that their supreme deity made this land when it was angry. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to set foot in Namibia in the 15th century. And yep, they didn't like Skeleton Coast either. Portuguese explorers thought this land presented the gates to the underworld. This is the place where the Namib Desert meets the Atlantic Ocean. It might be dangerous, but it's actually beautiful. Plus, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If Skeleton Coast had a PR manager, they would quit on the first day on the job. The area is not exactly tourist-friendly because of its geography and history. Beneath the sand and the waves, there is a secret ocean currently lurking for unsuspecting sailors. It's called Benguela Current. It flows towards the north along the coast of southern Africa. This part of the Atlantic is rich in marine life, but the current's land neighbor isn't that happy with the deal. This arid climate created the Namib Desert, one of the driest regions on Earth. And that marine life I just mentioned? It's sharks. 11 species of them to be exact. And yes, the great white decides to pop by once in a while. So far, we've got a desert landscape, strong currents, and sharks. Not a place for a beachside resort, definitely. But if someone ends up on Skeleton Coast, will they know they're in danger? Don't worry, they will. The beach is littered with wrecks of all sizes and shapes. If you remember that German ship I mentioned in the very beginning, its massive and rusted stern is now sticking out from the desert sand. There are some 500 wrecks in total scattered along the coast, and it's a mixed crowd, from Portuguese galleons centuries old to ships that ran ashore here in the 21st century. A modern fishing ship called Zela India managed to slip from its tow rope in 2008 and ended up on Skeleton Coast. Okay, it didn't escape on its own, it had some help from the elements. But it's better to be a tourist attraction on a beach than to be broken up for scrap. That's where the trawler was originally going, poor thing. Skeleton Coast's most famous inhabitant, to call it such a place, is the wreck of the Dunedin Star. The British cargo liner ran aground here in 1942. The massive rescue operation that followed reveals why it's so dangerous for sailors to end up here. The rescuers managed to save all of the crew and passengers, but at a heavy price. An aircraft and a tugboat were lost in the process. It took the last of the rescuers a full 2 months to return home to Cape Town. Why, you might wonder? One look at the map of the region reveals the reason. It's an endless sea of yellow, which is the sand. There are so few roads here, so Skeleton Coast is hard to reach by land. There are also legal obstacles. You need a special permit to drive into the area. But the skeletons in the name of the area don't only refer to ships, they also stand for animal bones. Most of these belong to whales and seals. Many animals have adapted to the area, so lions and hyenas roam the coastline in search of a meal. Yeah, now there are hungry lions as well, as if those sharks weren't enough. Other animals with a temporary residence on Skeleton Coast include elephants, cheetahs, leopards, and giraffes. In 1971, the Namibian authorities established a national park here, but except for surfers, after an adrenaline rush, they don't get many visitors. You can understand why. The Namib Desert is the oldest desert in the world, and it's not very tourist-friendly either. Those who travel to the region should pack sunscreen and a warm winter jacket. A weird combo, right? Well, not so much when you think that during the day, temperatures soar over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, the air temperature drops below freezing. What a climate roller coaster! And that's not the final danger. Yep, there's more. Remember how that German ship got lost in thick fog? Yeah, it wasn't a one-off event. Because of the region's climate, fog shows up frequently. Sailors should cover their ears now, but this fog is actually good for wildlife. This is their only source of water in the Namib Desert. Reptiles and mammals have adapted to the harsh climate. They use as little water as possible. Shifting sands, thick fog, strong currents, lions, and sharks. Not the stuff you would put in a tourist booklet, but Skeleton Coast isn't the only beach on Earth you wouldn't want to spend your vacation on. I will take you to Cape Tribulation in Australia. The area covers some 48 square miles in the northwestern part of the continent. And no, the area is not as dry as Skeleton Coast. It's part of the Daintree rainforest. You could say that here, it is the rainforest, not the desert that meets the ocean. The beach at Cape Tribulation is straight from a postcard. But looks can be deceiving. Australia? Probably sharks. No, crocodiles are out here to get you if you decide to go for a dip in the sea. There are saltwater crocodiles that the locals call salties. Well, that's a cute nickname for such a dangerous reptile. And it's not just them. The wildlife seems to have a beef with visitors. From October to June, the waters around Cape Tribulation are full of box jellyfish. Their venom affects the human cardiovascular system. When touched by a jellyfish out at sea, swimmers won't have enough time to reach land for help. Vinegar helps neutralize the sting, so you might want to keep a spare bottle in your luggage. Crocodiles and jellyfish sound dangerous, but there's one more animal you should look after. It's the wild boar. It might sound funny, but you won't laugh when you're being chased by one of these across the beach. 21 million wild boars live in Australia. They're mostly active at night, making it even more dangerous if they charge at you. The best defense is running in circles. Wild boars can't cut corners well. That's probably why we don't see many of them taking up careers as race drivers. Cape Tribulation has one last danger installed for you, and it's not an animal. Out here, even the trees are plotting against visitors. The stinging tree got its name for a reason. If you try to pick one of its beautiful red berries, it'll fight back. Its prickles are like tiny glass shards. The less than pleasant effect on your skin will last for a month. Then there is this wait a while bush. Who keeps naming them like this? This long vine has spikes that grab hold and just don't let go. They are so strong they can pull a human off a horse. You'll have to wait for someone to come by and save you from this thorny grabber. If you are about to cross this Australian beach from the vacation list, hold on for a second. Tourism is booming here. The local authorities have restricted access to all of the danger zones. Visitors go swimming in dreamy water holes that are surrounded by lush vegetation. There are even ropes to swing from. Now, that's a beach you can finally relax on. They say nothing is ever lost, and it's true. Let's discover ships frozen in time. The first one is truly fascinating. Here, the Antikythera shipwreck. It's a Greek trading ship from the 1st century BCE. It's located on the east side of the Greek island of Antikythera and at the merging point of the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. Around 2,000 years later, in 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers discovered the wreck. They were going to Tunisia, yet they were forced to find shelter from a storm on a nearby island. Since they couldn't go anywhere due to the storm, they decided to look for sponges until the weather got calmer. One of the divers discovered the shipwreck at depths of around 130 feet. Imagine someone going for a sponge hunt, but getting out to the surface with archaeological treasures.
the captain of the sponge boat talked to the Greek officials about what they had found. The officials sent 2 ships to the wreckage. The salvage operation was successful, and discoveries are now in Greece's National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The findings included 3 life-sized marble horses, jewelry, coins, and hundreds of works of art, including a 7-foot-tall Colossus statue of Hercules. Among these treasures, Antikythera ephebe, a bronze statue of a young man, caught more attention. Because the ephebe doesn't comply with any familiar iconographic model, and there are no known copies of his type, he held a spherical object in his hand. Scholars have different theories of who that person could be, but they are not in a consensus yet. More than 70 years later, Jacques-Yves Cousteau and his team went to the area and recovered hundreds more artifacts and the remains of 4 people. Interestingly, they discovered a complex set of interlocking gears, capable of predicting the movement of the sun, moon, and several planets. The mechanism can also show the times of solar and lunar eclipses years into the future. Think of this Antikythera mechanism as an early computer calendar, to plan significant events like agricultural activities, religious rituals, and Olympic Games. These artifacts found in the Antikythera wreckage are some of the most important findings in modern archaeology. Just the Antikythera mechanism itself has changed our perception of the limits of ancient technology. The mechanism has a sophisticated design and was made over 1,000 years ago. After all these amazing discoveries, experts believe that the wreckage site has remained largely unexplored, and is mostly because of its location and the landscape of the seafloor on which the ship rests. The wreck is too deep for scuba divers but too shallow to use something like a submersible. A survey made on the seafloor in 2012 showed evidence of a second wreck about 800 feet to the south. It's clear that this area has a lot to offer humanity. What would happen if those sponge hunters didn't go to the area? Scientists found a shipwreck in Antarctica at the bottom of the Weddell Sea 107 years after it sank. The name of the ship was Endurance, and it was the lost vessel of Antarctic explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton. Scientists who laid eyes on it decades later say it is among the greatest undiscovered shipwrecks ever. That is why they filmed the whole discovery. The video shows the remains of the Endurance and proves it is still in remarkable condition. It has been sitting in 10,000 feet of water for over a century, yet it looks like it sank very recently. So the story goes like this. The ship was crushed by ice and sank in 1915. Shackleton and his crewmates had to escape by themselves in small lifeboats. From then on, it was all about survival. Shackleton imagined to get his crew to safety. Then, the ship sank. Yes, this is a pretty impressive story. But why did scientists prize this ship? Firstly, Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition sailed to make the first land crossing of Antarctica. Yes, the crew was trapped in ice, but the intention was important. Secondly, it's about the challenge itself of finding the shipwreck. The Weddell Sea is almost always covered in thick sea ice. The same ice that made the Endurance sink. Getting near the presumed sinking location is super hard, let alone being able to conduct research. Experts of the modern expedition team foresaw the time when the lowest extent of Antarctic sea ice would come using satellite images. They realized that the weather was in their favor to start an expedition. Dr. John Shears said that they have successfully completed the world's most difficult shipwreck search, fighting against constantly shifting sea ice, blizzards, and temperatures decreasing to -0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeesh, I can't imagine the worst conditions in Antarctica if these conditions are in their favor. Lastly, look at this. It's timbers. They're very much intact. Plus, you can read the ship's name. It's still visible. Marine archaeologist Menson Bound says that this is the finest wooden shipwreck he has ever discovered. He has 50 years of career experience, so I believe the guy. So how come the wood is not rotten? Dr. Michelle Taylor, a deep-sea polar biologist, said that there has been little wood deterioration because the wood-munching animals are not in this forest-free region of Antarctica. Workers of a coal mine in East Serbia discovered 3 shipwrecks that had been there for at least 1,300 years. The largest shipwreck is an ancient Roman fleet. It's around 50 feet long with a flat bottom. It's estimated that the ship could carry a crew of 30 to 35 people. Looking at its hull, you can see the marks of repairs. Wow, this one had a lengthy career. You know, it gives us insight into more than 1,000 years ago. The two smaller vessels, on the other hand, match descriptions of boats used by Slavic groups to attack the Roman frontier. These two have been discovered under mud and clay in an ancient riverbed. Apparently, in those times, there was a Roman base in a place called Viminacium City. Interestingly, Viminacium was a provincial capital with an estimated 40,000 inhabitants in the 4th century CE. For comparison, it was even larger than Pompeii. The Kostelach coal mine is a center of hidden gems. Archaeologists had found evidence of ancient human and animal activity here before. For instance, in 2012, experts found bones of at least 5 woolly mammoths, which went extinct about 10,000 years ago. Canadian archaeologists found a ship 150 years after it went missing in the Canadian Arctic waters. This merchant ship is called HMS Investigator. It was purchased in 1848 to search for the explorer Sir John Franklin's ship that got lost in the Northwest Passage expedition. So, HMS Investigator left Britain in 1850 for this rescue operation. The expedition crew, captained by Robert McClure, sailed the Investigator into the water. He realized that he was in the final leg of the Northwest Passage, the sea route across North America. But before he could sail into the Beaufort Sea, the 122-ton ship itself got stuck in the thick ice. The crew spent the winter over the Prince of Wales Strait. The following summer, McClure tried again to sail to the end of the passage, but the ice blocked his way once more. Here, too, the crew was forced to leave the ship. He steered the crew into the Bay of Mercy. There, they were to remain until 1853 when the crew of the HMS Resolute rescued them. Imagine a crew of 60 people who had to spend 3 winters in the Arctic without even knowing if they would survive. Later on, the ship was found sitting upright in about 36 feet of water. It was in very good condition. Arctic water has prevented the outer deck of the vessel from deteriorating quickly. The outline of the ship and its timber can be clearly seen. Plus, archaeologists have uncovered artifacts on land left by the sailors. They had unloaded everything before abandoning the Investigator. 3 sailor graves and 1 British naval shipwreck had also been discovered in the area. I wonder what else they could find there.
Wow, it's the only place where 1 minute you're learning 17 natural ways how to get rid of houseflies, and the next, you're taking an epic journey straight into a black hole. More than 10 billion, with a B, views in total. That's 47 billion minutes watched, or more than 70,000 years. That's all the way back to the Ice Age. No, I wasn't around then. 40,000 videos, hundreds of topics, and most importantly you, a whole 44 million of you. Our viewers. We could populate an entire country if we wanted to. We'd like to continue helping you learn and giving you useful skill improvement tips. Got a thirst for knowledge? We've prepared 4 masterclasses on creating a 2D character animation from scratch, 10 hours of video lessons, practical tasks using professional software, and additional materials that you can use with your own projects. Get the full course now and create your own animated masterpiece. Being afraid of the ocean is a very understandable fear. We have it in our genes. In the past, humans had to avoid certain dangerous situations, like big animals and deep bodies of water, in order to survive. Plus, we've only explored 5% of the oceans, so we never know what we can stumble upon there. In regular conditions, GoPro is just a camera. But if you find it lying at the bottom of a 400-foot pit in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, that will make your blood run cold. I know 400 feet may not seem like much, but a person who is deep diving for fun usually can swim from 59 to 98 feet deep only, unless they're a professional diver. But say you made it to that pit and retrieved that GoPro. That would have still been fatal to you. In this specific hole where the camera was found, there would be a layer of hydrogen sulfide, a very dangerous and foul-smelling gas, at the mark of 300 feet. The gadget was 100 feet lower, alongside its owners, 2 long-lost explorers. To this day, very few people manage to dive this deep and go back unscraped. In fact, the deceased explorers were found only with the help of submarines. Now, you might be curious about the content of the GoPro. In stories like this, we expect proof of foul play or sinister footage. But the only thing found there were the images of happy times the explorers had during their trip. A sad ending to a vacay. Now, in deep waters, you can also find many species that seem to be otherworldly, but in a cute and interesting way, like the alien sponge. This fun little fella is a sponge first seen near the Mariana Trench in 2016. It's actually part of an ecosystem dubbed Forest of the Weird. Okay, this makes it sound a bit creepy. And what adds to the weirdness is the fact that the alien sponge had two little holes that resemble little eyes, so like it's peeking at you. Ah, another fun fact? The skeleton of this type of sponge is made of glass. And if you're afraid of cockroaches, I'll let you take a deep breath here. Ready? Cool. Because on the ocean floor, there are more than 20 different types of giant isopods, beetle lookalikes, that can be as big as 14 inches. Yikes! But fear not, these guys usually roam the ocean floor for food. So, unless you dive 7,000 feet, which we've just seen is not possible, you won't run into them. Now, despite the horror movie name, the bloody belly comb jelly is actually a fascinating creature you can also find in the ocean. They live in the twilight zone of the ocean, which is between 820 and 4,900 feet below sea level. Pretty far from where you usually soak your feet. But what's so cool about this jelly is its color. Because in the twilight zone, the light is very scarce. Many animals either emit a faint glow, like the anglerfish, or create a camouflage. The jelly here is blood red because, in the pitch-black darkness of the ocean, other animals won't see it digesting colorful bioluminescent prey inside its stomach. Besides, the jelly has a row of combs that spark a very beautiful iridescent light. Beautiful and lethal. Humans also have their fair share of contribution to the weird fest that is the ocean floor. Depending on where you swim, you might just find parts of rocket engines used during the Apollo program. Now, when a rocket is launched into space, parts of it are dropped into the ocean where it runs out of propellant, making the rocket itself lighter. And a part of the Apollo 11 rocket engine, yes, that one that first took humans to land on the moon, was actually recovered from the ocean after more than 4 decades. And you can see it at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. Not a space fan? Well, there's something for the Oregon Trail lovers too. There are 2 locomotives living their best lives, or worst, depending on your point of view, just off the coast of New Jersey. They're from the 1839. Even if you have a lingering fear of the deep ocean, you can still find weird things by simply walking on the beach. Look at these bizarre Garfield landline phones washed away in Brittany, France. The French have been having bizarre encounters with the sarcastic orange cat since the 80s, and it took about 30 years for French farmer René Morvan to come forward with a simple explanation. A shipping container with Garfield merchandise got stranded in the sea, only to find its final resting place in a sea cave. We bet Brittany locals are still haunted by the creepy smile of that landline phone. And just like a storm uncovered the Garfield secret stash, it also moved a few ships that sank more than 600 years ago. But this is not a simple Titanic story. It actually sounds more like Pirates of the Caribbean, because when the storm moved those old ships, authorities from Caesarea found 2,000 gold coins, some silver and bronze coins, gemstones, and rings. It was a bigger treasure than a dragon could hoard. But don't get your hopes up. Even though most of the underwater archaeological zones in this region are open to divers, these treasures are safely tucked away in a museum. Speaking of pirates, and I was, another weird thing you can find chillin' in the ocean is the pirate city of Port Royal, Jamaica. In 1692, the city was devastated by an earthquake, followed by a tsunami. A really bad twofer. But the good news is, you can still visit it today, well, scuba diving, that is. This is actually not the only sunken city in the world. There's also Thonis Heracleion in Egypt, which is not at the bottom of the sea per se, but at the mouth of the Nile River. There's also Baion, a Roman town built atop a supervolcano. Now, you might be thinking Baiae had the same fate as Pompeii, but guess what? The floor actually sank and the town went down with it. So, have you ever heard of underwater crop circles? Back in 1995, divers in Japan spotted perfectly round circles formed in the sand. They were 6 feet in diameter and looked like those crop circles from sci-fi movies. Scientists simply couldn't figure out what or who did it until they caught the culprit red-handed, a tiny male pufferfish only 4 inches long. This little guy uses its body and fins to draw circles and squiggles and decorates his creation with seashells and corals. It takes the fish about a week to do so. All this hard work is part of a mating ritual, and if a female pufferfish likes the art, she will lay her eggs there, right in the center. The circular design of the underwater crop circle actually channels fresh water to the middle of the circle, the ideal scenario for the eggs to develop. And guess what? After she lays the eggs, the female pufferfish leaves, and it's the male that tends the eggs. But just in case fishes are not your thing, we can also offer you a cargo of rubber duckies, turtles, beavers, and frogs, 28,000 of them to be exact. These bath toys were traveling from China to the US, but much like our friend Garfield, were caught in a storm in 1992. From the North Pacific, our friendly duckies and beavers made their way to the UK by 2007, but some were bolder and traveled to Australia, Indonesia, Chile, Hawaii, and even Alaska. Now, have you ever seen a strange thing washed up by the beach? Let us know in the comments. Bye.
For years, the world's most valuable shipwreck was just a legend, until now. It has finally been found, and among the wreckage was a real treasure worth $1.1 billion. To understand this better, we need to go back to 1622. That year, the mighty Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de Atocha set sail from Havana, packed with riches belonging both to King Philip IV of Spain and to the wealthy members of the crew. We're talking about gold, silver, copper, and emeralds from Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Venezuela. The cargo was so large, totaling more than 40 tons, and so vast that it took 2 months to transport it to the ship. The ship was also packed with people. There were 265 people on board. At first, everything went well, but then came the Florida Straits and trouble. The crew found themselves lost in the night that was not only cold, but also stormy. And before long, they were facing a powerful hurricane. The wind tore the masts apart. Giant waves destroyed the rudder, and soon, the Atocha was sinking toward the darkness of the seabed. The disaster that night meant a huge loss of wealth for King Philip IV, but even worse was the loss of life. Of the original 265 crew members, only 5 survived. They managed to climb up the mizzen of the ship, the only part that remained above water. With all that treasure gone, the Spanish were quick to spring into action and devised a salvage operation. 5 ships were sent to recover the cargo. The plan seemed simple and easy. After all, the hatches were securely locked, so the treasure could still be there. But almost immediately, things went wrong. For example, one of the 5 ships ran aground before it could even begin its journey. In the end, the search dragged on for 60 years, and many factors contributed to the mission's failure. That may not seem so bad today, but back then, divers didn't have the technology or safety equipment that we have today. Exploring the seabed was risky, and more often than not, it led nowhere. While searching for the Atocha, the rescuers found traces of another vessel, the Santa Margarita, the Atocha's sister ship. Another hurricane passed through the region a month after the sinking. The seabed became a jigsaw puzzle with pieces of the ship scattered everywhere. The rescue mission became almost impossible. Over time, the Spanish managed to recover part of the Santa Margarita's cargo, but Atocha's treasure seemed lost forever. Even so, no one forgot that story. Then in 1969, more than 300 years after the sinking, everything began to change. An experienced deep-sea diver, Mel Fisher, stepped in and decided to rewrite history. Mel had already spent a big part of his life at the bottom of the sea. He and his wife even ran a diving school in California. So, Mel gathered his family and moved to the other side of the country. He led a new team of hunters whose mission was clear: to find the lost treasure of the legendary Atocha. They had little more than a boat, some diving equipment, and metal detectors, but that was enough to get them started. They focused on a region called the Matecumbe Keys, mentioned in several 17th century documents. In the first year, they traveled more than 100,000 miles but found absolutely nothing. It seemed like an impossible dream. But Mel still had a card up his sleeve: Eugene Lyon, a historian who would change the course of the search. Eugene delved into the Spanish archives in search of clues about the shipwreck. It was there that he found an important document that mentioned a group of people trying to save it. On the last page, it was mentioned that an area 100 miles from where Mel was searching had been the scene of the main exploration. This little piece of information was the needle in the haystack they needed. They rerouted the ship and soon arrived at the new location. But there was a challenge. That part of the ocean was deeper and the visibility there was almost zero. It was difficult to see your own hands. However, Mel knew how to deal with the adversities of diving and came up with a simple and brilliant solution. He installed 2 large tubes on the boat called letterboxes. Those tubes could be lowered in front of the propellers. The idea was ingenious. They sucked clean water from the surface and directed it to the bottom of the sea, exactly where the divers were. This technique not only cleared the murky water, but also helped to reveal objects that had been hidden for centuries. And still, the search took 16 years. During that time, Fisher found many lost items. Then, in 1971, they discovered a huge anchor. This was the first clue that they were close to finding the Atocha. In the following days, more objects appeared. Cups, swords, and ancient nails turned up. To keep everything organized, the team created a circular map. On it, they marked the exact location of each item they found. They also used radio transmitters on land and a receiver on the boat, which allowed them to know precisely where they were. The system was so efficient that it could measure the position with a margin of error of just 1 foot. Over time, a line began to form on the map, pointing to where the Atocha's main treasure might be hidden. They followed this trail for 2 years. Just when they were starting to lose hope, they found silver bars. It was the year 1973. This opened the door to much bigger discoveries. The silver alone was worth over $100,000, but the real treasure was yet to come. On July 20th, 1985, valuables that would be worth around $1.1 billion today were finally discovered in the main hull of the ship. The treasure included 180,000 silver coins, 24 tons of silver bars, 125 gold bars, a collection of pearls, and 66 pounds of emeralds. Some of these finds were priceless, not only because they were rare, but because of their history. The Atocha Cross, the Royal Orb, and the Atocha Ring, 3 royal artifacts, were found in near-perfect condition. The Atocha Cross was the most valuable of all the artifacts. It had 9 brilliant green emeralds set in 22-karat gold. A true treasure from the past, shining once again after centuries underwater. Soon after the discovery, the state of Florida thought, wait a second, we want a piece of that treasure. They went to court, demanding a whopping 25% of the value. A bitter legal battle ensued, and it lasted 8 years. It even went all the way to the Supreme Court. But in the end, treasure hunter Mel emerged victorious. He was even invited to The Tonight Show, showing off a massive gold chain found in the wreckage, wrapped around his waist like a belt. People called it the money chain, and for good reason. The find was so big that the wreck was declared the world's most valuable by the Guinness Book of Records in 2014. After the initial excitement, Mel sold some of the gems, but the bulk of the treasure remained in the family for a while. What was left was auctioned off. No one knows exactly how much the jewels were sold for, but one thing is for sure. Their value has skyrocketed over the years, and it's not just about the sparkle, it's about the legend that lives behind them. Today, these treasures are part of the particular Muzo collection, the largest private collection of the Atocha artifacts in the world. And no, they're not for sale. But the good news is that you can still see them. They're on display, shining brightly in homage to Colombia's rich history and the famous mine from which they came. The people behind them say that these emeralds are as iconic as the rubies of Mogok or the sapphires of Kashmir. And honestly, they're right.
It has recently become a popular location for many tourists looking for the perfect place to get away from it all. If you're lucky enough to catch a sunny day here, it's like no other, I can assure you. Chances are, you'll end up having loads of foggy days, but let's be honest, they have a special allure of their own. This enchanting smile-shaped island is called Sable Island. It's located 190 miles from mainland Nova Scotia. It wasn't accessible to the general public until 2013. That's when it was added to the list of National Parks of Canada. You can get here either by plane or by water. But what's so enchanting about this place anyway? There must be something since the yearly tourist count is growing every year. Firstly, there's a spectacular number of wild horses here. There are between 200 and 500 horses roaming free all over the island. There's also a large population of gray seals. The place is also the only breeding location of a rare bird species called the Ipswich sparrow. If you're already considering a trip here, there are some things you need to know first. Remember that fog I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that Sable Island is the foggiest place in the Canadian Maritimes. I'm talking about approximately 127 foggy days each year. During such days, Sable Island literally disappears underneath a thick layer of fog. You won't be able to explore the place on your own either. The local regulations state that visitors need to travel within a group, and they also need to keep a 197-foot distance from the wildlife they can encounter here. As charming as this place may be, it holds a dark secret hidden beneath the sandy dunes, and it has nothing to do with beautiful creatures living here or the island's unique vegetation. Apart from being known from its horses and seals, Sable Island is infamous for an overwhelming number of shipwrecks. Over the years, about 350 ships have ended their lives here, on these sandbars. When survivors described their experiences, they usually mentioned harsh weather conditions near this mysterious island. The island also made its way into literature when it was described in a book called The Perfect Storm, which was written by Sebastian Junger and published in 1997. The book was so successful that it was later adapted for the big screen in 2000, with George Clooney playing the leading role. The first recorded shipwreck near Sable Island dates back to 1583. The boat was named the HMS Delight and was under the command of British adventurer and explorer Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Only 17 people managed to survive the catastrophe by escaping in a small boat. Records mention that they spent 7 days at sea before reaching the shores of Newfoundland. In 1884, another vessel named the Nicosia struggled in the thick fog as well. The ship was completely destroyed, but fortunately, all 18 crew members managed to survive. The captain's son was almost lost at sea when a lifeboat capsized when he was climbing into it. He somehow managed to stay underneath the lifeboat, which was completely submerged. When this lifeboat righted, he eventually emerged from the water and was rescued for the second time. The years between 1947 and 1999 were relatively quiet on the island. In 1999, though, a yacht called the Merrimack ran aground near the shore of the island at about 2 a.m. on July 27th. The 40-foot fiberglass boat had a crew of only 3 people. Natural gas exploration workers, who were luckily not far away, rescued them. The crew managed to fly safely to Halifax the next day. The owner of the Merrimack tried to recover his boat by hiring local fishermen. Unfortunately, this operation was unsuccessful, since only the fittings of the yacht were eventually saved. It took no more than 6 weeks for the sand and waves to crush and completely break up the hull of the Merrimack. So what is it about this place that's so dangerous for boats? Does it have anything to do with the weather? Or maybe there's other forces at play? The explanation turns out to be a bit more complex, and it wasn't easy to figure out, at least not way back in the 1500s. First of all, the island is located close to one of the world's richest fishing grounds. Since it's also near one of the major shipping routes between Europe and North America, hundreds of vessels sail past it each year. The likelihood of shipwreck increases when there are so many boats roaming around the area. Sable Island is also in the way of most of the storms that move up the Atlantic coast of North America. It's no surprise that boats often get hurtled straight onto the shores of this island. The weather has a lot to do with it too. During the summer season, the warm air from the Gulf Stream creates a dense fog as it merges with the cool air by the Labrador Current that passes by the island. Other currents don't help the matter. Sable Island is next to the meeting point of three major ocean currents: the Gulf Stream, the Labrador Current, and the Belle Isle Current. Since the 1950s, radars and other modern navigation tools have been used on commercial vessels as well. Up until then, the sextant was the main instrument used to figure out a ship's location. It doesn't mean that sextants weren't accurate, but this instrument couldn't work properly without a clear view of the sun or stars, which means it didn't help much in dense fog, such as the one surrounding Sable Island, or when it was cloudy. Often during bad weather, the captain of a ship navigated, relying on their experiences and intuition based on the ship's speed and direction. That's why most of the survivors in shipwrecks near Sable Island said that the captain had simply miscalculated the ship's position, crashing into Sable Island by accident. This dusty, sandy land is as unfriendly to ships as it is to trees. There's reportedly a single tree on the whole island, and it looks a lot more like a bush. It's actually a pine tree. And since the famous island horses don't see it as much of a food source, it somehow managed to survive. Reports say that the tree was planted back in the 1950s. Local authorities were trying to grow a forest on the island to make it a bit more welcoming. They've planted tens of thousands of trees over the years, more than 69,000 evergreens, 600 fruit trees, and about 55 pounds of pine seeds, along with other plants which could survive the conditions on the island. But they were no match for the extreme weather and sandy soil. Out of all those plants, just one pine tree is still alive. Thanks to its resistance, it has even become a symbol of Sable Island. Interestingly, for around 40 years, the island also had just one inhabitant. Can you imagine that? One person living on a remote island for so many decades? It's the story of a woman called Zoe Lucas. She chose to surround herself with the only residents on the island: the horses, the gray seals, and the many species of birds. An esteemed naturalist, she mentioned in an interview she gave back in 2017 that she was used to living on the island and that she never got lonely. To survive here, she had to put together an essentials kit. It included a notebook to take notes and a pair of binoculars to study the wildlife. You can safely assume she wasn't scared of the intimidating surroundings, since she decided to eventually call this place home. At first, Zoe wanted to set up camp on one end of the island, near some abandoned buildings. But eventually, she settled in a wooden house near a bunch of sand dunes. A Canadian institution called the Meteorological Service of Canada put together the simple construction back in the 1940s. Parks Canada operates the building these days. Zoe's work included gathering as much data on the local horse population as possible. It could help scientists better understand how they managed to adapt to the unfriendly environment. She also helped gather the debris that made it to the shore to help track pollution levels. Among all the rubbish that she collected, there was a refrigerator and a crate full of fresh peppers. Some other specialists eventually started working rotating shifts on Sable Island to offer the brave woman a little bit of company now and then.
For millions of years, something has been lurking in the depths of the ocean. You can't see it, touch it, or map with sonar, yet it keeps entire species trapped where they are. Recently, scientists uncovered its victims, strange jellyfish cousins that look almost identical, except for one odd detail. One travels the world's oceans, the other is stuck in the Arctic, unable to escape. What blocks its way? It's not ice, not land, not even depth, something far stranger. Let's take a look at this mystery. The jellyfish in question belong to a subspecies with a pretty complicated and hard-to-pronounce name, so I won't. See? Anyway, they live very deep in the ocean, about 3,300 to 6,600 feet down. That's so deep that sunlight doesn't even bother showing up there. The strange thing is that some of these jellyfish have a little bump or knob on top of their umbrella-shaped body, and others don't. And this tiny difference decides their entire life story. Jellyfish with a knob are world travelers found across all oceans. Jellyfish without a knob are stuck in the Arctic, like they're grounded for life. To figure out what was going on, scientist Javier Montenegro and his team looked back at more than 120 years of jellyfish photos and sightings. Then they added in modern DNA testing. The results were curious. Genetically, the knobless and knob jellyfish in the Arctic were identical to knob species in the Western Atlantic. In any case, this bizarre similarity aside, only the knobless jellyfish are trapped in the north. So, what's keeping them from leaving? It's not a giant underwater wall or a rocky barrier. Instead, scientists think the wall is biological or linked to geography. Just like something called the Wallace Line, nature's invisible border. So imagine sailing on a boat in Indonesia, crossing from the island of Bali to the island of Lombok. It's only about 22 miles, not even enough for a long nap on deck. Once you're there, the beaches look the same, the weather feels the same, and the palm trees all sway the same way. But when you look at the animals, it feels like stepping into a different universe. Birds, mammals, even reptiles suddenly don't match what you just saw a short distance away. That invisible line dividing the two worlds is the very Wallace Line. The story began in 1859. Alfred Russel Wallace, a British naturalist, traveled through the East Indies. While hopping between islands, he noticed something that didn't make sense. On the western islands, like Borneo and Bali, the animals all look like they belong to Asia – monkeys, tigers, woodpeckers, the usual. But east, the animals seem to have come straight out of Australia. Marsupials, cockatoos, even kangaroo cousins. The two sides weren't blending at all. Wallace realized that a narrow stretch of water could act like a massive biological border. How could two islands, close enough to see across the water, host such different wildlife? The line is not just some quirk of nature, but the result of powerful geological forces. Between the islands, there are underwater trenches that have never dried up, even when ancient sea levels rose and fell. To the west, you can find the Sunda Shelf. That's an enormous sunken platform that once connected Asia to nearby islands. That's why Borneo, Sumatra, and Java are packed with Asian-style wildlife. To the east is the Sahel Shelf. It once linked Australia and New Guinea, helping Australian species spread. The Wallace Line slices right between these shelves. This part of the world, the Indo-Australian archipelago, is where four massive tectonic plates slam into each other. As the seas rose, animals became trapped on islands. When seas fell, some species made it across, but not so many. That's why two islands, separated by just a short boat ride, ended up with completely different ecosystems. The Wallace Line isn't some recent discovery. This invisible border has been messing with animals for millions of years. Now, back in the Pleistocene, when giant mammoths roamed our planet and the oceans were up to 400 feet lower, many of the islands in Indonesia were actually connected. Tigers and elephants could stroll from place to place without ever touching water. But even when sea levels dropped that much, Asia and Australia never linked up. There was always a stretch of really deep water between them, and that watery gap acted like an uncrossable wall. For more than 50 million years, it's been stopping animals from mixing, keeping Asia's lineup on one side and Australia's weird crew on the other. That middle zone of islands, the ones stranded between the two continents, is called Wallacea. Only animals that could swim, fly, or somehow make it across the open ocean managed to live there. Everyone else was stuck at home, no exceptions. As you see, there can be a logical scientific explanation for almost any phenomenon on Earth. Maybe we could find one of those poor trapped jellyfish. Apparently, the problem lies in the North Atlantic Drift. It's a warm current that flows up from the Gulf Stream. Scientists don't know exactly why, but something about this area blocks the knobless jellyfish. One theory claims that predators beyond the drift are too dangerous for these creatures. Another idea is that the knob itself somehow gives jellyfish an edge in survival, but no one really knows. For now, it's like an invisible border. Knob jellyfish pass, knobless jellyfish stay put. On the Pacific side of the Arctic, there's no need for a mysterious barrier. The Bering Strait already does the job. On average, it's only 165 feet deep, which is way too shallow for deep-sea creatures to get through. So these jellyfish, knob or no knob, can't escape south. And since we're back at the topic of animal life, let's speak a bit more about the weird fauna quirks of the Wallace Line, because animals are the easiest way to see this barrier in action. Birds, for example, often refuse to cross even the tiniest gaps of open water, so their species stop right at the line. Mammals are even stricter. Bats can cross because they fly, but larger land animals never made the jump. On the Australian side, it's all about marsupials like kangaroos and possums. You'll also find native rodents that settled there more recently. On the Asian side, you get a different cast: apes, elephants, tigers, cats, monkeys, rhinos. Sure, there are some oddball exceptions. Sulawesi, right in the middle of the divide, has macaques, pigs, and big-eyed little tarsiers. But overall, the split is obvious. Step off the boat, and the animal world changes completely. But then, what about plants? Well, they don't always follow the rules as neatly. Seeds can hitch rides on birds, float on water, or get blown by the wind. But even here, the Wallace Line shows up. Take eucalyptus trees, for example. They're as Australian as kangaroos. Almost no species make it across to Asia. There's just one exception, which somehow popped up on Sulawesi and the Philippines. That's the magic of the Wallace Line. Two islands can look the same climate, same forests, sometimes even close enough that you can see across the strait. But their animals are like night and day. And it's all because of an invisible border in the sea that's been in place for millions of years. Such discoveries might sound small, but they're important. They show us that there are still hidden boundaries in the ocean that humans don't understand. These invisible fences could explain how marine animals spread, evolve, and survive. As scientists put it, finding two different body shapes inside a single genetic family shows how little we know about jellyfish and other gelatinous creatures. As for the Wallace Line, even today, it stands as one of the most fascinating mysteries in biogeography. It reminds us that life doesn't always spread evenly. Sometimes, a short stretch of water can act like an uncrossable wall. There's a lot more mystery in the deep sea than we thought.